Good morning, everyone. This is Dan at Unicorn Riot. Thanks for tuning in. We're coming into day 9 of jury selection in the Derek Chauvin Trial in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the Hennepin County Government Center. So yesterday we saw 2 jurors get struck after a questionnaire to evaluate if the news of the settlement, the civil settlement between George Floyd's family and the city of Minneapolis, was going to affect the thinking of the jury. So 2 people got struck from the jury yesterday, and then later in the day 2 people were added back in. And then, good morning to everyone on the chat. Everyone's checking in, which is great. And then at the end of the day, the judge said that the defense gets another 3... I'm sorry, I forget if it was 3 or 4 strikes. The defense gets several more strikes, and the state gets some more strikes as well. I'm sorry, I don't have the number in front of me, but that was a bit of a surprise at the end of the day. So we're expecting court to start in just a few minutes. So I'm gonna pull that up in a second. Unicorn Riot's a 501c3 nonprofit media organization. We try to educate people about ongoing social issues. If you can support our work at unicornriot.ninja/donate, that's great. We're going to try to keep sticking with the Chauvin Trial feeds as much as possible and run historic items from what happened last summer in Minneapolis and related things to that. Yes, okay, so people are on the chat are saying it was that the defense got 3 strikes and the state got 1 strike, and I am pretty sure that's correct. Yes, I just was. It's early. I still need coffee. So so the defense, it seems, got another 3 strikes. And so if people haven't seen this process before, the way that it works is that the defense and the prosecution each get a number of strikes. One thing that we have seen in some of the proceedings is something called a Batson motion, which in this case was where the state was sort of arguing that, you can't just simply filter a jury pool based on race, and you have to have a race neutral reason for striking people, and that was definitely part of the process so far. Alright, so let me just show you. We have a nice new title graphic here which shows the main players. Let me just go over some of the people that you're likely to see. So obviously Peter Cahill is the judge in Hennepin County, the district court trial judge who's running this case. Eric Nelson is the lead attorney for Derek Chauvin. He's talks quite a lot every day and has been trying to screen out defendants that have said sentiments critical of the police, you could say, for sure. Amy Voss is one of his assistants. You'll see her usually behind him. Keith Ellison is the Minnesota Attorney General. It's a constitutional officer in the state of Minnesota. So he's running the case. Basically, this case, if people aren't familiar with it, this case got pulled out of the Hennepin County Prosecutor's Office. Mike Freeman got removed. So now it's in the hands of the Minnesota Attorney General's office. Matthew Frank is an assistant attorney general. Neil Katyal is a pretty high, high profile, what you call a big law attorney, former, major solicitor at the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Department of Justice, nationally. So he's been working on this one. Steven Schleicher is with the Minnesota AG's legal team. Jerry Blackwell, Josh Larson, Aaron Eldridge, and Sundeep Iyer, and also Christina Marankaki is some kind of jury specialist. So those are pretty much the main people that you can expect to see during this process. So they need to have 12 jurors and 2 alternates, and as of this morning we're at 9. So thanks all for your support of our work. We really appreciate it, and it's been great to see the chats, develop into a good, a sense of community, people kind of checking in and all that. It's actually really cool. It's not easy to have, positive internet chats these days, especially about troublesome subjects like this one, that's for sure. So, let's see. I'll just mention really quick. You can check out our website at unicornriot.ninja. The main link to the Chauvin Trial is that big banner across the top. That's our landing page, which we try to update every day. The landing page has information on what's been, summaries on what's been going on each day, essentially. And we're going to have some more out about that. But yeah, we try to update it every day. And we do have a story from a few days ago about the Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter at the center of the jury questionnaire, which is a big deal. So what you will see continually today is them asking the jury, the potential jurors, Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, and stuff like that. And that comes from this jury questionnaire, and it's really been quite effective at directing the discussion in that direction, that's for sure. So we'll see more of that today, most likely. Since they're starting a little later, it seems pretty likely that they are not going to have an extensive discussion of motions. Usually it's been the first hour has been motions, and then they switch to the jury selection after 9 Eastern. And so now we're at just a touch after 8:30. We can see people moving around. This is the live view of the courtroom right now. So they might do some motions. And then the other thing that's important to watch for is on Friday, Judge Cahill is going to consider changing the venue, and that's a fairly big deal. So if the venue gets changed, then I am fairly sure in Minnesota that means it would move to a different county. It could be somewhere like Duluth or something like that. And then I believe they would have to pick a new jury again, but I'm not 100% sure about that. So venue change and continuance are motions that the judge said he's considering from the defense, and those. So we should know more about that on Friday. And obviously, it's been pretty tough in Minneapolis. It's tough to see the city fortified and on lockdown. The situation has been a wrenching experience for everyone back in the city. I think since last summer, and it continues to drag on in this. It's a troublesome thing to have to deal with stuff like this. Like it's about as shocking as anything that can happen to the city. So it's not confirmed that they're moving the case. I just want to answer the question. It's just that there is a request for a venue change, but the thing is that this is famous worldwide, right? Like this comes across the news on CNN. It comes across the news everywhere, right? And so the argument that people will be less aware of it outside of Hennepin County is rather implausible. We're hearing someone's asking if we have this live on YouTube. It should be live on YouTube right now. I'll check into that. It definitely should be. And if you can, just try to please. Yes, the YouTube feed is working. We've got viewers on it right now, which is great. So yeah, you can catch our work on besides on our website, and we have edited videos on our Vimeo channel, and we are live on 4 services right now on Twitch, which is our new channel. We're almost up to 400 Twitch followers, which is great. That's at twitch.tv/unicorn_riot. So hop on over there if you like. We're on YouTube. Search Unicorn Riot. Facebook at facebook.com/unicornriot.ninja. And we are live on Periscope on Twitter. And we are going to be, Periscope is about to be discontinued, so we are going to be trying to transition into that new Twitter live platform. And here's the judge. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
And I think we did say 8:45 at one point earlier this week, but last night I thought I did say 8:30. So, but I understand. grab you at the moment you come in the door.
No, I think I'm ready to proceed.
All right.
Judge Cahill.
All right.
It would be useful for me, Your Honor. Obviously, we agree with the ruling Your Honor made on this a few days ago.
Right.
And Your Honor has had a chance to give it some further thought. And it would be helpful for me as a starting point to have the benefit of Your Honor's thinking now.
Where am I at? Is it, in other words, where am I at?
Yes, that's
Yeah,
right, Your Honor.
I think that's appropriate. When we left this issue last time, I had said it would appear to me that the expert testimony of Dr. Vincent would be admissible on the fairly narrow issues of Mr. Floyd's emotional response on May 25th were consistent with the claustrophobic reaction, anxiety, or panic attack. Subsequent to that, when we were talking about the May 6th separate issue, May 6, 2019 issue, and part of the defense offer of proof was they wanted to show that this was a common scheme or plan, and that, or modus operandi, that Mr. Floyd's emotional state and statements were very similar, if not identical. And I had ruled earlier, and I stand by that ruling, that Mr. Floyd's emotional state on May 6, 2019, and the statements he made really aren't relevant because his intent is not an issue here. And whether his statements and emotional response was feigned or if it was genuine doesn't really matter, because the question is, what behavior did the police have to deal with, whether it was genuine or not? And I told the defense that's irrelevant, which made me realize isn't the same thing true on the May 25th date. And so it seems that Dr. Vincent's testimony is the same testimony that I precluded the defense from offering regarding May 6th. In fact, that was the original ruling on the the reverse Spiegel the defense offered on the May 6th incident until this new evidence came forward. It is not the court's intent to reverse that part of the May 6th ruling, that the emotions, his response, his statements, whether he was crying or not, are not really relevant, because his intent, his emotional state, and whether he was feigning or had a genuine response are not relevant. So that gets us back to May 25th. How does it become relevant? Because the defendant's intent is clearly an issue, but not Mr. Floyd. So that's kind of where I'm at.
All right. Your Honor, the interpretations over George Floyd's behaviors are, in fact, what's relevant with respect to May 25th. As Your Honor has heard from the defense, practically every time they describe the incident of what happened on that date, they talk about George Floyd's behaviors and interpreting it. Resisting arrest, fabricating difficulty breathing, that it's somehow either fabricated or reflective of a cardiopulmonary condition or drug addiction.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I have no problem with the behaviors. For example, they are saying resisting arrest. I think it's, when you watch the video, that behavior is clear. It's, you know, what's going through his mind, that's a concern. So I guess let's talk about that.
Yes, Your Honor. The behaviors don't speak for themselves necessarily. We can see them. It's how they get characterized by the defense that we are rebutting. That if we look at the videotape, for example, and we can see, for example, they're telling George Floyd to get in the squad car, 320, and they find that he's not compliant. Does the non-compliance mean that he's resisting arrest? Or does it mean that he's not capable of getting in the squad car because he's suffering from the effects of anxiety or panic? And the way that this issue comes up in terms of his behaviors is the defense has been free to characterize George Floyd's behaviors in any way they choose. Typically in a light that's not very flattering to him, that is obviously pro-defense, as you might expect. But it's a free kick at the goal if we're not allowed to offer alternative explanations for the same behavior. That wouldn't be a diagnosis of George Floyd. It would be more the general testimony from Dr. Vincent that a person who has encountered a traumatic event, as George Floyd had, just any general human, would be expected to have a reaction that would manifest anxiety, etc. And here's what this looks like in terms of behaviors. Frozen by fear and panic, shortness of breath, difficulty breathing. It's not a heart problem; it's a panic problem. And so Dr. Vincent's test.
Do you have a doctor who's going to say that?
Dr. Vincent will be the doctor. She's an MD, triple board certified, Your Honor, in forensic psychiatry, adult and adolescent medicine, and again, forensic psychiatry. So she would be the expert who would be qualified to talk about the way that a human being would respond to a traumatic event. As Your Honor knows, George Floyd had only recently had a gun put in his face and the risk of having, frankly, his head blown off over the investigation of a fake $20 bill by the police. That is a situation that would cause trauma to any human being. And so how he responds to that, the feeling that he was going to die if he were put into the squad car, which he said repeatedly, how would a general human being respond to that from an anxiety point of view? How does that manifest in terms of behaviors and conduct? Is that an alternate explanation to the narrative put forth by the defense that it can only mean resisting arrest, it can only mean drug intoxication, it can only mean fabrication? It's an alternate explanation. And if this type of testimony is completely irrelevant, then it would have to be irrelevant to both sides. And meaning if we're not able to offer an alternate explanation, then the defense shouldn't be allowed to stand up to say that George Floyd was resisting arrest, which is an interpretation, to stand up and say he is fabricating any of this, which is an interpretation of his behavior, to suggest that it was drug-induced or related, which is an interpretation of his behavior. So either both sides can put forward their explanations for the behavior, some of which is psychologically conditionally based. Either both sides can or neither side can. And I'm certain that that is what the defense intends to do, is what Your Honor has already heard repeatedly in this trial. So that's the first reason it's relevant, Your Honor. But a second reason is that it goes to the issue of medical causation. Is it true or not true that when Mr. Floyd is saying that he has a shortness of breath when they're trying to force him into the squad car, is that reflective of a heart problem, a lung problem, or does it relate to issues of panic or anxiety?
Well, let me stop you there. I read the report of Dr. Vincent, and she's an MD but not a pathologist. Is she going to say to a reasonable degree of medical certainty that the shortness of breath was due to a panic attack and not to a heart condition?
No, Your Honor. And as Your Honor recalls in our discussion of the case of State versus McClendon that deals with the introduction of evidence on psychological condition evidence, the dividing line that gets drawn is that such an expert, and Dr. Vincent is a forensic psychiatrist, so she deals with the interface, again, of science and medicine, but in the realm of psychiatry. The dividing line that is drawn is that the expert can provide general testimony as how a general human being would respond to a traumatic event, the type of event that you would expect a human to have a reaction to. You would expect this panoply of reactions. She can describe what they are. She can't then take the next step to build the bridge to diagnose Mr. Floyd. So simply giving that to the jury as an alternate explanation, sort of medically, if the defense has jumped to the conclusion that we're looking at the same facts and the same evidence, and they jump to the conclusion that it's indicative of a heart problem, then she's at least should be allowed to offer to the jury that an explanation that should be on the list for any type of a differential diagnosis is that this may be reflective of simply anxiety or panic, because that's what happens in humans who suffer traumatic events this way. And that is in the wheelhouse of a forensic psychiatrist, to give that kind of testimony, which it would be the behavioral manifestations of what might be psychological conditions in response to a traumatic event. And that would be her wheelhouse. But Judge Cahill, I think this is relevant in one other area too, and this goes to the issue of the objective reasonableness of Mr. Chauvin's conduct. And the assessment, again, of those behaviors matters, even for objective reasonableness. I would refer the court to the Minneapolis Police Department use of force policy on de-escalation, from which I am reading, when safe and feasible, officers shall consider whether a subject's lack of compliance is a deliberate attempt to resist or an inability to comply based on factors including, but not limited to, on the list, behavioral crisis. Behavioral crisis. So we ought not be precluded from introducing generic evidence relating to those psychological conditions that would reflect a behavioral crisis, that is, circumstances that Mr. Chauvin should have considered, for the jury to consider whether those existed in the totality of circumstances that Mr. Chauvin would have experienced. And the fundamental question is, would a reasonable officer not have recognized a behavioral crisis and not employed the force that Mr. Chauvin did, is the question. And to the extent those behavioral crisis issues are at issue in the case, then having an expert who can explain medically what they are is helpful to the jury, just to understand it. In the same way that the police are trained on the risk or hazards of putting people in a dangerous, deadly prone position, having an expert to explain how that manifests or affects humans is helpful to the jury.
Well, if you put that in issue, I've already signaled that I'm considering allowing the May 6th, 2019 case limited, for example, to the officer's approach of the car, Mr. Floyd eating drugs, and then subsequent to that being examined by a paramedic and his the indication that Mr. Floyd was in a hypertensive emergency with a systolic blood pressure over 200. If I grant your motion and allow Dr. Vinson to testify as to, claustrophobia, anxiety, panic attacks have these results or manifestations, and that they include shortness of breath, essentially giving the state reason to argue that the jury should infer that it was a genuine anxiety response, not active resisting. Don't I also have to then allow the defense to talk about the May 6th, the similar thing, not just the contact, eating the drugs, and then fast forward to the paramedics' treatment, but actually allow everything they want, which is what he was saying, how he was emotional. Don't you think that if I give that to you, I have to also allow the defense to do that?
You ought to know, I think that's in a way, it's a false comparison in this sense, that in both instances, it's the defense that's the proponent. It's the defense that is attempting to pursue the May 2019 incident, and it's the defense that's characterizing Mr. Floyd's behaviors in ways that we think are imbalanced and unfair. So with respect to the May 25th incident.
Well, let me stop you there. But if you put in this evidence, they are entitled to contest it and rebut it.
No, it's us who's rebutting the defense assertion. If the defense does not assert that Mr. Floyd was resisting arrest, interpreting his conduct, if the defense doesn't assert that Mr. Floyd was faking claustrophobia, the defense interpretation, if they don't make those assertions, then we're not rebutting it with Dr. Vinson.
Well, let's be clear. Are we talking about evidence? I'm not going to allow them to present evidence that he's faking, somebody's opinion, oh, he's faking. Just like the state is saying, it's genuine. It's more a matter of argument. In closing argument, either counsel can say, look at this. This is clearly somebody who's resisting arrest and is faking his response. Where the state would say, how can you say that's faking? He's clearly short of breath and he's panicking. That's usually a matter of argument, not evidence.
Well, if we want to make the argument, though, Your Honor, that what the jury is seeing is reflective of panic or anxiety, it certainly would have been helpful to the jury for them to have heard someone testify as to how these various conditions are reflective of anxiety or panic, such that they have a foundation from the evidence and not just from lawyer argument. And I'm certain that Mr. Nelson is going to make these kind of arguments about Mr. Floyd. Your Honor has heard it repeatedly already, the reference to resisting arrest, evidence of everything being related to drug use, that the defense is doing a full-on trial of George Floyd, who's not on trial, but that is what they're doing. And well, that's our point of view, Your Honor. And so if the court were to rule that the defense, that neither side is allowed to characterize Mr. Floyd's behaviors, that we don't get to bring in a Dr. Vincent to say that the behaviors are reflective of anxiety or panic attack. On the other hand, the prosecution doesn't get to accuse him of resisting arrest.
Well, here's the other part. It's not mutually exclusive that someone is in a mental health crisis and is also resisting arrest. Would you agree with that?
Well, Your Honor, not without the use of expert testimony in that regard, because...
Oh, let's go into a more hypothetical. Someone is having a mental health crisis. They are removed from this case completely, and they start to thrash about and refuse to get handcuffed. An intentional act, refusing to be handcuffed, refusing to whatever, it may be due. Their behavior may have been induced by a mental health crisis, but it's still resisting arrest. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Well, I would agree that it's non-compliant, and the difference we're having, Your Honor, is definitional. When I conceive of resisting arrest, it suggests that there is an intention, that the person is able to form an intention and is in fact acting on the intention to resist arrest, as opposed to simply non-compliant. The police policies and procedures speak in terms of non-compliant behavior, and that then the police have to make an assessment as to whether the non-compliance is resisting arrest as opposed to an inability to comply.
Because of the policy?
By the policy and the training.
Okay.
And so there's a difference. But to Your Honor's initial question, essentially, is it not fair to allow in the May 2019, if we're allowed to have Dr. Vinson then put in testimony about George Floyd's behaviors? Our testimony with respect to Dr. Vinson in that regard is rebuttal testimony in nature. It is rebutting the assertion from the defendants that George Floyd's behavior can only mean one thing, and it's the things that the defense has asserted. We think that's an unfair conclusion, and the jury is entitled to have the alternative explanation for it, because the defense has made that assertion, an unfair assertion that's jumped to a conclusion. And but for the defense doing that, we wouldn't have a need to inform the jury of an alternate explanation or to illuminate as to how the defense has jumped to a conclusion in making that assertion about George Floyd's behavior.
Well, here's where you're talking about rebutting the defense. When we're talking about your case in chief, how can you rebut something? I don't care if they said it at motion hearings. The jury doesn't know any of this. It's about what the evidence is, and you can't rebut prospective evidence. And it seems to me that it's either both come in or neither come in.
Well, if Your Honor, in the line of cases that deal with the admission of psychological condition evidence, the right of the prosecution or party to introduce that evidence can be itself triggered by statements made even in the opening statement, such that the prosecutor doesn't have to wait if it's already been put into the case in an opening statement. It's in the nature of rebuttal testimony, but it doesn't have to wait to a rebutting if it's already been put into the case and the jury's already heard it. And so if they hear, for example, Mr. Nelson stand up and say, here you can see George Floyd is resisting arrest in his opening statement. And so he's gone and made that assertion. When we're putting our case in chief, we can say you heard them say this. That is jumping to a conclusion. There is an alternative explanation for that that relates to how one behaves when they have a panic or an anxiety attack from a traumatic event such as George Floyd encountered. Not diagnosing George Floyd, any human being who went through such a traumatic event.
All right. All right, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, I think the court hits the nail kind of square on the head. I mean, this is a criminal trial, right? Parties are permitted to introduce evidence, draw in closing arguments, that's my job as a lawyer, is to draw inferences from that evidence. What do witnesses say? What's happening in videos? All of this. This is the very nature. And both sides are allowed to introduce information that rebuts that. I think the court is 100% correct. They either both come in or neither come in the context of the emotional state of Mr. Floyd, right? If the defense takes the perspective that what Mr. Floyd is doing, and I'm just going to ask if we can silence computers because it's really distracting. Someone's computer keeps dinging.
Please, everyone. Thank you.
In the context of the evidence of this case, right? The jury will see videotape, they'll see body camera footage, they're going to hear from witnesses who describe what they see and observe and hear and things of that nature. This is the entire nature of the adversarial system. Here's the evidence. This is how the state interprets the evidence. This is how the defense interprets the evidence. Jury, you decide which interpretation is correct. But what's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? If the state is going to say, if I'm making the inference that Mr. Floyd was resisting arrest in the course, or he was exaggerating his condition, or he was actually experiencing a medical condition that went unrecognized by police officers, the state can theoretically bring in evidence to say here's an alternative explanation for that. Again, I think it's limited in this particular context, but that then opens the door. That's the precise issue, is it opens the door to say, he's saying he's claustrophobic here, but in a prior incident that's remarkably similar, that's not an issue. He gets right into the squad car, right? So it rebuts that assumption. That's the nature of the adversarial system, and I think the court understands that. We've tried lots of cases. The court has tried, a large number of cases, and understands the inferences that can be drawn from evidence. But what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and it opens the door.
All right. I'm going to take this under advisement until tomorrow. It'll be part of the rulings on the continuance, change of venue, the May 6th, 2019 other evidence that I've already outlined, and then Dr. Vincent, and we'll go from there. So we'll do these rulings tomorrow morning. So, all right, I think, where are we on jurors?
We're ready.
All right. Let's just take a quick 10-minute stretch break.
Because Bob Cole racist ass needs to go. He has done too much damage in the community as an officer and too much damage to the community as the Police Federation president. His policies align with white supremacist values. He has been tied to white supremacist organizations and the white supremacist biker group as well. So this is not someone who is about equity. He's not for the people moving forward, and he's definitely not for having any police held accountable for whatever they may do. He's called Killer Cops Heroes, which definitely sides with white supremacist theories. Like, you're taking a black man, these white supremacists are celebrating that. And that's what he's doing by calling officers Killer Cops Heroes, not doing anything to advocate for justice for the families, no sense of the police needing to be reeled in or to be corrected, to be terminated, to be imprisoned, to be retrained. None of that, which I don't believe you can retrain the police, because a racist is a racist and a killer cop's going to be a killer cop. And practice makes permanent. So that's practice all their life. So I don't believe in that. Actually, I'm a police abolitionist. So let's take it right there. I don't believe in the police system. The entire system has got to go. It's not something that can be manipulated into serving us properly or correctly. It's like having a Model T car and expecting it to fly. Like, you can drive it off a cliff and it might be airborne, but it's not going to fly. No matter how you can reconfigure the parts of a Model T, it's only going to be a car, and you cannot get it to truly fly. And that's like the police system. We can try and manipulate it and adjust it, but it's never going to give the people the true protection that people need. So it's got to be completely torn down, and we need something else in place that does not include white supremacist ideology, white supremacist people, and capitalism.
Hello everybody, welcome. This is Nico with Unicorn Riot. We're here at the Lake Street Open Growth Space. After the uprising, while stuff was burning, the community came together, took this space, and started creating plants. They've been having food giveaways, plant giveaways, movie nights, and just providing an open space for the community.
In the middle of the uprising, one of the things that felt most vibrant about it, that you didn't really see as much on the spectacular images of burning things, was that when you would go down to the target lot, you could meet people, and there was this window of connection really unlike anything you would experience in just daily life. The guard came in and really crushed everything, but then also it kind of got taken over and co-opted by the city council and nonprofits and church groups. It feels like that spontaneous energy of just random people making connections, taking care of each other, having fun together, and also generating resistance has kind of been lacking.
To various degrees, I think a lot of us were really inspired by the uprising here and inspired by people taking action and just, rebuking kind of the logic of capitalism in whatever way. And one way that people have decided to do that was to kind of open up this open growth space. We're not a nonprofit, we're not a community garden, we're just people who got together to do something. We hope that anyone who feels inspired can come and build or put or use this space for whatever they want to use it for.
When the only project is just to make the revolution happen in an abstract sense, you just see this wave of burnout that happens again and again. Doing fun things that feel meaningful and joyful together, I think, is actually a really, really powerful way of building up. I'm not a huge gardener person, or I feel intimidated. What excites me about this space is having it as a gathering spot.
We kind of settled on that name because as much as the food sovereignty angle is a big part, we also didn't necessarily want to decide that this space was going to be all a garden. Our hope is that other people will use this space however they want to use it.
That's kind of what the vibe has been, just trying to create space for people to come together and encounter each other. Showing a movie right on Lake Street, people just come by. The first movie we did was Do the Right Thing, to honor both the sense of mourning of the uprising and also the sense of joy and the sense of rebelliousness. There were people walking by just being oh yeah, I remember when this came out, back in the 80s, it's same shit now, same shit. 5 different local filmmakers showed things, even in this moment of pandemic and uprising. The combination of joy and rage and humor was just so cool. I'm hoping and envisioning it being a resource that people can use to throw movie nights or other things.
As much as some people were hurt to see their community burn down, I think it was also inspirational in the sense that some things need to come down in order for new things to grow. Whatever passions or skills they have, we hope that people can use this space and other spaces like this in the city, because there's a lot of different places that aren't really being used right now. And we would like to see those places being used for something that benefits the community rather than just sitting and waiting for a developer to come in and build a condo.
From my understanding, under Nixon's ag secretary, when we decided to move toward producing cheap food for workers, You know, we live in a society that is immersed in this idea of growth. One of the primary demarcations of importance and of influence is land ownership. And first of all, I mean, we know the history of this country. Maybe some don't know it as well as they should, including me. But we know that native land has been stolen. We know that slave labor has been used. We know that then eventually small farmers have been pushed out. And we know that people are more and more removed from the basic skills and knowledge they need to take care of themselves, and we become ever more reliant on corporate produced items for our very own survival. Food sovereignty brings in the notion that we should be able to grow, have land and grow and provide for ourselves and our neighbors and share. And it's not just an economic argument, but it's also an argument about increasing social connection by producing the food we eat, healthy food. So issues of returning the communes and dealing with private ownership. I would like to see a world where more and more of us get together, own the land communally, produce the things that we need and share, and begin to eliminate the commodification of everything, which just leads to more and more resource and input and less time for us to live joyful lives. We live in a society that, in my humble opinion, is full of shit. People should love each other, you know, and we obviously don't. We value our car, our status, our paycheck, our next raise more than we value each other.
All right, good morning. Didn't see you there. All right, you are Juror 86, is that
86,
correct?
correct.
Well, good morning, and thank you for being here. Before I turn the questioning over to the attorneys, there are a couple of things I'd like to do. First of all is to swear you in, because all your answers have to be under oath. So if you could raise your right hand. You swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Now, the second thing is, I am wearing a mask, plexiglass between us, plexiglass in front of you, plexiglass in front of the lawyers, so you get a double layer there. The point being, there are sufficient precautions in place that if you would like to take off your mask to be more clearly heard, or just because for comfort's sake, feel free to do so. But it's pretty much up to you. If you want to keep it on, that's fine. Either way, make sure that you are close enough to the microphone that we can hear you well, and I'll try and adjust settings as well to make sure that you don't have to feel like you're bobbing back and forth.
Okay.
All right. First of all, you filled out a questionnaire. Thank you for doing that and getting it back to us. That provides a lot of good information for us to start with. But was everything true on that questionnaire?
Yes.
All right. Is there anything in reflection, because it's been a few months, that you thought, oh, I should have added this, or this wasn't right what I said, or maybe your opinions have evolved and you want to change something?
Not that I can think of right
Okay.
now, because I can't remember everything.
Right, and it usually comes up in the context where the lawyers are asking you questions.
Okay.
Because they'll point to specific questions, and they'll probably, to remind you what your answer was, read the question and the answer for you to refresh your memory. My point is that I want you to be comfortable saying something that is different from what's in the questionnaire.
Okay.
Because of the passage of time, it's actually more common than not that people do add things or change things or say that wasn't accurate. So just want you to feel comfortable doing that, okay? Now, you weren't supposed to read any articles and try and avoid media about this case, but I think it's become clear that it's been a couple months. Inadvertently, you might have been exposed to some media, a headline, maybe you're watching the news and a blurb comes up about the case and gives you a little bit of information before you can turn the channel off. Anything like that happen to you?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay, tell me about what you recall and when roughly time frame on when it happened.
Okay, so in my household, the news constantly on, like, morning, noon,
And I'm going to just turn your microphone up a little bit. There we go.
Yes, yeah, like I said, in my household, others watch news, morning, afternoon, in the night, and, even though I don't actively, do it, I can always overhear, and my friends also, will send, things like that on, over social media and things like that, or conversation might struck up, even though I try to avoid it, it's kind of difficult to do so.
Right, well, because we told you, don't tell anybody you're a juror, so
Correct.
you can't exactly, stop.
Correct.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. What information do you recall from it?
The most recent one was about the settlement.
Okay, and what do you recall as far as details from either the headline or friends telling you about it?
It was a headline, and then people in my household talk about it too.
Okay.
So yeah.
What is the substance of what you recall on the settlement?
I know the amount, and my friends, like, they tell me, their thoughts about it or whatnot, but I don't say anything. I just listen. But yeah, I've gotten feedback and know where they stand on it and stuff like that. So.
And what did your friends say about it?
That one of them said, if that's not enough, I think,
Okay.
I believe, and another said, if I can remember clearly, if that's what it is, that's what human life costs or something like that. I don't remember, but
Okay.
yeah.
As far as that goes, how do you think it'll affect you in deciding this case? Like, did it move you, as far as a juror being impartial, do you think it moved you to one side or the other?
Yes, somewhat.
Okay, tell me about that.
I, like, when the incident first happened, I was constantly listening.
Okay.
To be honest, I was constantly keeping updated, and to say the least, I've analyzed, and I've been in conversation with friends and family about it, and I'm drawn to one side, to say the least, and I think that's where I still stand.
Okay. I'm just trying to find your questionnaire here, just so I can maybe go over some specifics. But which side do you feel you were drawn to originally?
Plaintiff.
Okay. So not Mr. Chauvin, but towards the state. Would you agree with that? Okay. And that was before this talk of a settlement. How did that move you? You think you may have been...
I think it's still pretty much the same.
Okay.
I would say greatly, move drastically, but around the same.
Okay. So you're kind of here along the spectrum towards whether you're leaning this way or leaning that way. You're somewhere there. Do you think it moved the needle a little bit towards, even further towards the state and against the defendant?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Okay. And you know what? We appreciate that you're honest and not hiding anything, so it's very good that you give us all this information. Because we need a juror that can be impartial, some people are able to be that because they don't know much about the case, they didn't follow it. It's not a matter of intelligence or personality. It's just some people have seen more about the case, and on the basis of that have a firmly, maybe a leaning one way or the other.
Yeah.
And further events can kind of tip them even more in that direction because other people just don't pay attention to it, so it's not a problem. So you think you probably have followed this pretty intensively as far as the news and everything?
Yes.
Okay.
Because it's constantly being, even though I try not to, it's constantly there, and it's difficult to avoid it.
Yeah, I think I've even adjusted my advice to the jurors, which is not avoid news about this case. It's like avoid the news because it's so saturated with this case.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
I try to, but
Yeah, exactly. I know. We know it's all inadvertent, and people are not violating the court order to avoid it because it's almost unavoidable in some ways. So, I appreciate what you've just said. I'm going to excuse you from this panel. Again, don't take any offense in that. It's not that you're not a fair and impartial person. It's just that this case and the amount of exposure you've had, especially to that settlement that you said might have pushed the needle a little bit, I'm going to excuse you from this jury. So thank you for coming down. And most of all, thank you for your question, or your answers to the questions.
No problem at all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Juror 86 is excused for cause. Juror 87. Okay. Wondering if you could have a seat right here. Good morning. You are Juror 87, is that correct? All right. I'm going to go through a few things before I turn it over to the attorneys. The first of which is to swear you in, because all your answers have to be under oath. So if you could raise your right hand. You swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer all questions regarding your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
Okay. All right. You're fairly soft-spoken, clearly. And we have to make sure that you're heard. We have plexiglass in front of the lawyers, plexiglass between us, and plexiglass in front of you. And I'm going to continue to wear a mask, even though I've had one shot so far. I think it's appropriate that we take all the precautions we can. But given that level of precaution, you may, if you wish, remove your mask if you think it'll allow you to speak more clearly, or if it's just comfort. Okay, and if at any time you want to put your mask back on, feel free. We won't take it as an insult or anything like that. Basically, you're in control of that. All right. You filled out a questionnaire, and I appreciate that because it gives a lot of good information for us to start with. Is there anything on, well, first of all, is that questionnaire true and correct?
Yes.
All right. Any changes or additions that you want to make to the questionnaire that you can think of right now?
I can't.
Okay. It's very common that in the months since you filled out the questionnaire that you might realize on reflection that I should have added this, or I should have talked about this, or that was inaccurate. I need to make sure they change that. Or maybe your opinions have evolved. So when the attorneys are asking you questions, they'll probably be more specific and zero in on certain questions and answers, and even reading them to you and your answer to refresh your memory.
Okay.
What I want you to understand is that it's all right to say something different than what's in your questionnaire. That doesn't get you into trouble because, like I say, on reflection, certain things need to be changed. Okay?
Okay.
All right. The questionnaire also advised you not to read any articles, avoid the media about that. But again, it's been a few months. This case continues to receive media coverage. And we understand that inadvertently jurors may have been exposed to some, like a headline or a blurb on the news that they can't turn the channel off quick enough. Mm-hmm. Anything like that? Did you learn any more information about this case or any related cases since you filled out the questionnaire?
Only number of jurors that had been selected when I was running through my news feed last week.
Have you heard anything about any related litigation, civil cases, anything like that?
No.
Okay. Any settlements or anything like that? Have you heard anything about
No.
other cases? Okay.
No.
All right. Sounds like you've been able to pretty much keep yourself away from the news.
Trying to.
Okay. And that's all we can ask are your best efforts. So, all right. You know something about the case from prior media before you filled out the questionnaire, before you were summoned. And the lawyers will probably go over that a bit. And you may have even formed some opinions about things, about the people involved. And the question I have for you is, as a jury, you have to decide this case just on the evidence you hear in the courtroom, not on what you've heard outside the courtroom or on opinions you formed outside the courtroom. It has to be just focused on the evidence and to follow the law as I give it to you. Do you think you could do that?
Yes.
Okay. You were given a long list of witnesses. Did you recognize anybody on that list?
Donnie Chung.
Okay. And how do you know this person?
He's a neighbor.
Okay. And what does that person do?
I think he works for the BCA, but I can't really remember. It might be FBI, something like that.
Okay. Lives in your neighborhood?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm not sure what that person's role is. Let's assume that that person actually is a witness, because the list of potential witnesses is long.
Yeah.
If they do testify, can you treat that person just like any other witness?
Yes.
Apply the same standards?
Yes.
If you disagreed with their testimony and didn't find it credible, could you go back to your neighborhood and if you saw that person not have a problem dealing with them?
Yes.
Okay. All right. We estimated the trial length at 4 weeks. It sounds like you could make that work with your personal and professional life. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's a yes?
Yes.
All right. The other thing is the court reporter is taking everything down, so we have to deal with yes and no quite a bit.
Okay.
You have one very good habit, though, is you don't talk over the other person. The lawyers and I are probably the worst offenders at doing that, but you seem to not have a problem doing that. And that's very good because, again, you can't have people talking over each other because it makes for a bad record. Okay, so unless you have any questions for me, I'm going to turn you over to the attorneys. No
Can't
questions?
think of any.
Okay. And just to maybe be a little closer to the microphone, as to juror number 87, Mr. Nelson, you may inquire.
Good morning, ma'am.
Morning.
Thank you for your patience, for being here yesterday, and for returning this morning. I'd like to ask you a series of kind of general questions, get to know you a little bit better, and then move into some of your responses to the questionnaire. Would that be okay with you?
Yes.
All right. So let's assume that you and I were to meet under a much different circumstance, a party or a social event or a neighborhood gathering. What would I learn about you during that conversation?
I'm married. I have 5 kids. I stayed home and raised them all.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they're all adult children now, I
Yes.
believe? Right. Wonderful. And are you from Minnesota originally?
Yes.
All right. You obviously were familiar with, before receiving this packet, you were familiar with the circumstances kind of surrounding this case. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
It was kind of hard to avoid it in the cities at that time, wasn't it?
Yes.
When you received this packet and you learned that you were a prospective juror in this case, what was your first reaction to that?
I was a little nervous about it.
Okay. And why?
Well, I knew it would be a high-profile case. I knew the city, kind of blew up after the incident happened with Mr. Floyd, and I just was afraid of what might happen being part of the trial.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. When you say you were afraid of what might happen, are you talking about your personal safety? Are you talking about the city again? What do you mean?
Both, but more that anybody being on a jury or involved with it might have a little bit of a reason to worry for their privacy and their safety.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. when you came downtown yesterday and saw the state of the government center, how did that make you feel?
I had seen it before. I knew that it had been fenced off and wired in. And mostly it just made me feel sad that we're kind of in this state.
Sure. Okay. Did it alleviate any of your concerns for your personal safety while we're in the trial?
Yes, it did. I feel like the building is very secure.
Okay. And in terms of yesterday, when the judge kind of gave the initial instructions that we're trying to protect your anonymity, not putting you on camera, not referencing you by name, things of that nature, how did that make you feel?
I felt that that was reassuring.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, at some point, and again, we don't know when or under what circumstances, but your name may be released to the public as a juror if you were to sit. How do you feel about that?
That makes me nervous.
Okay. And are you concerned, I mean, you referenced kind of privacy and safety concerns.
Yeah.
If you were to sit on this jury, would you be sort of hyper-focused on those types of concerns that it would distract you from listening to the evidence, focusing on the evidence, and ultimately deliberating and potentially reaching a verdict?
I don't think so.
Okay. Would those concerns influence any decision you may make at the end of the case because you want to avoid, you think that one vote may help you avoid physical safety or keep you safer?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, I apologize. It was
That's
a very.
Okay.
If you were in the deliberation room and there's two potential verdicts, right? Guilty or not guilty.
Right.
Would your concerns about your personal safety influence your decision about guilty or not guilty? Do you think that
No.
you would be safer if you voted one way versus the other?
Right. I understand. It wouldn't influence it.
It would not? Or?
It would not.
Okay. Ultimately, you would be able to listen to the evidence, listen to the testimony, look at the exhibits, and render a decision based on the evidence as it's presented in court?
Yes.
Okay. Now, have you with 5 kids, I'm assuming at some point there were some conflict between your kids?
Yes.
And as their mother, you were called upon to resolve that conflict.
Yes.
How do you approach that from the context of conflict resolution?
Try to seek out the matter and what happened, what the facts were, and what the reactions were, and who might be right and who might be wrong.
Right. It's fair to say that there's a significant amount of conflict in this case, right?
Yeah.
There's obviously a very big conflict, which is state of Minnesota versus Derek Chauvin. And then there is potential for conflict within the jury deliberation room. There's 12 people who may have 12 vastly different interpretations of what they saw and heard during the trial, right?
Yes.
How would you envision yourself approaching that type of conflict within the jury deliberation room?
I would try to listen to what everyone is saying, try to understand their point of view, and make the best decision that I could.
Okay.
I don't typically like conflict, but
Sure. But obviously, I mean, this is a situation where conflict may abound.
Yes.
You understand?
yes.
So the question becomes, you say you don't generally like conflict. If you're in a room and you feel that, you have made your mind up one way or the other, and others disagree with you, are you the type of person who is going to abandon your position simply to avoid the conflict and gain consensus? Or are you going to kind of stand your ground and say, no, I'm standing by my conviction?
I would stand by my conviction.
again, in your personal or professional life, have you been called upon to kind of determine whether one of two people is telling the truth about a situation?
Yes.
Again, with your kids, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And maybe with kids it's a little easier, but how do you approach, you're going to hear witnesses in this case, right? And you're going to have to, your job as a juror is to assess their credibility. Is this person telling me the truth about X, Y, or Z? How do you assess a person's credibility?
That's a hard question. Out of any context, just.
Well, I mean, I guess let's just put it back into the context of your kids, right?
Okay.
Two kids come into you to say to you, "This is what happened," and one says X happened, and the other says Y happened, and you know your kids. How do you assess that situation?
I look at the past history of my kids and generally how I know their behavior is. Try to understand the situation leading up to a conflict.
Okay. So kind of gathering more information,
Yes.
Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
And what if other people saw that same incident? Would you go to other people and ask them their opinion about what happened?
Yes, I would try to get all of the information that I could and
Okay.
make the best decision after that.
Fair enough. Can you think of a situation, again, in your personal or professional life where you were 100% certain you were right and you later learned that you were wrong?
Yes.
Okay. And how do you deal with that? I mean, what's your kind of response to that?
I typically go back to the person that I wronged and explain that I was wrong.
Okay. And do you try to apply that lesson to future behavior, or do you just kind of go, no big deal, I was wrong?
No, I always try to learn from it.
Okay. Ultimately, again, your job as a juror is to analyze this evidence, to hear the evidence, to analyze it, only the evidence that you hear in this courtroom. And at the conclusion of the case, the judge will give you the law that applies to the case. And you have to decide. You're what's called a judge of the facts. What happened, right? Let's assume you get this sheet of, this is the law, these are the instructions we have to follow. And you read the law and you go, that can't possibly be right. Or I think this law should be different. I've got a reason, a personal belief that this law should be different. Can you follow the law as the judge instructs you, even if you think the judge is wrong or you think the law should be changed?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to just follow up with some of your questions and how you responded to the questionnaire. Again, we understand that this was national and international news before you received this questionnaire, and that you've been exposed to some information. And thank you for taking the time to fill this out. But I wanted to ask you a question about. There's lots of references to like a video that was made in this case, and you watch the news or the nightly news from time to time, correct?
Yeah, pretty rarely that I watch it, but yeah.
Okay. And well, there's a video that became public, and there's actually several videos that became public. You said that you've never seen any video of the arrest of Mr. Floyd?
No.
Okay, not even little snippets or clips on the news?
No, I saw a picture.
Okay.
But I did not watch the video.
Okay. So when you've watched the news, you may have seen like a still frame photograph that appears to be taken from a video kind of a thing?
Yes.
Okay. But never went and sought out or looked up this video of this arrest?
No.
Okay. But you have had conversations with friends and family members. Have your friends or family members described to you what they saw in this video?
No, not really describing it, just, no, actually not describing it.
Okay, like, but just maybe generally talking about it, right?
Saying that they'd seen it, and kind of the general news story that he was arrested and held on the ground and had a knee on him.
Okay.
Yeah.
You had heard some, in your explanation, you had heard some information about past incidents involving Mr. Floyd as well?
Yes,
All right. And you understand that Mr. Floyd's not on trial here, right?
I do.
Okay. And ultimately, you may or may not hear about previous involvement or previous incidents involving Mr. Floyd or Mr. Chauvin, right? But let's assume you don't hear any of that. Can you set what you may have learned aside and, again, assess this case based on the evidence presented in court?
Yes.
Okay. And you had heard about 2 separate autopsies that you thought were performed. You wrote that you heard one coroner's report said Mr. Floyd died as a result of asphyxiation. Another said it was due to drugs in his system.
Yes.
Okay. And again, you'll listen to various testimony throughout the course of the case, and if those issues never come up in this case, can you set aside what you thought you had heard or read and judge the case based on the evidence as it's presented in court?
Yes.
You were asked some general impressions about both Mr. Chauvin as well as Mr. Floyd. With respect to Mr. Chauvin, you had a neutral opinion, and you wrote, I haven't heard or read or seen much of anything about the defendant. And with respect to Mr. Floyd, you checked both neutral and somewhat negative, and then wrote somewhere in between these, and you wrote, I am bothered by the fact that Mr. Floyd, and then you reference a prior incident or allegation involving him. But you also understood that he had served some sort of penalty or something like that. So,
Yes.
okay. Again, it's okay. Everybody forms their own opinions, right? And your opinions are as valid as mine or anyone else's. Can you set aside any opinions you may have formed about Mr. Floyd? And again, only analyze this case based on the evidence as presented in court.
Yes.
You were asked a question. The question reads, do you believe your community has been negatively or positively affected by any of the protests that have taken place in the Twin Cities area since George Floyd's death? And you wrote, I believe it has been negatively damaged.
Yes.
Okay. Can you explain why you think that?
Well, obviously the physical damage to the city, and seems like there's more crime than there was before. The reputation of the city seems to have taken a hit.
Okay. And can you see any positive things that have come out of the protests?
I can't say that I'm aware of any positive things that have come out of it.
Okay.
It seems pretty negative right now.
Sure. Certainly the sort of the mood of the city has changed, right?
Yes.
One of your sons went to one of the protests, though, right?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have a conversation with him about why he did that? You know.
Yes.
Okay. Do you agree there's a difference between a protest and a riot?
Yes.
Okay. Fairly self-explanatory, right?
Yes.
So the protests versus the riots, right? I think everyone would agree the riots had left a bad feeling. Mm-hmm. But what about the protests, the peaceful protests?
What's the question?
Well, I mean, is there anything positive that
Oh.
comes from peaceful protests?
I think there can be, sure.
Okay. Do you associate the rioting with the protests?
To some extent, I do.
Okay. Do you think that everyone who protested rioted?
No, I don't.
Okay. Did your son riot?
No, he did not.
He protested, right?
He did.
And, so if you were a juror on this case, I mean, obviously your son may have a different perspective, like on the protest part of this, at least. I don't know you, I don't know your son, and I don't know what you've talked about. But if you were a juror in this case, and you ultimately rendered a not guilty verdict, could you go to your son and explain why you did that?
I could.
Okay. Would your vote be influenced because you didn't want to disappoint your son?
No.
You've had your car broken into and your son's car was stolen in the past?
Yes.
And you had to call the police?
Yes.
You indicated that you were satisfied with their response?
Yes.
Or very satisfied, I should say?
Yes.
So it's fair to say you have a pretty strong respect for law enforcement and things of that nature?
I do.
Okay. And obviously this case involves a whole lot of police, right?
Yes.
Mr. Chauvin being a police officer, police officers investigating this case, police officers will testify in this case. You were asked a question, and I'm going to circle back into all of that. You were asked a question that because law enforcement officers have such dangerous jobs, it is not right to second guess decisions they make while on duty, and you somewhat disagreed and then drew an arrow to towards strongly disagree with that. So knowing that the police are going to testify in this case, and presumably against Mr. Chauvin, as well as Mr. Chauvin being a former police officer, can you evaluate the testimony of police officers for what it is? Meaning, would you assign more trustworthiness to a police officer simply by virtue of the fact that they're a police officer?
No.
Okay. But you somewhat disagree with the proposition of questioning decisions that police officers make, right?
Yes.
So are there circumstances wherein a police officer's decision-making is within bounds and should be questioned?
It shouldn't be.
Should.
Should. I think that there's always room for questioning someone's reactions or behaviors. But there should probably be a process that goes through.
So like a more from an employment context or like a civilian process as opposed to a criminal process?
Could you read the
Sure.
question again to me?
There was a page where you were asked you were given several blanket statements.
Yes.
And you were asked to just say, I strongly agree, I sort of agree, all the way over to strongly disagree. And this statement is, because law enforcement officers have such dangerous jobs, it is not right to second guess the decisions they make on duty. And you somewhat disagreed to almost strongly disagreed with that.
Okay.
Okay. So I guess the question is, are there circumstances under which it is appropriate to second guess police officers?
Yes.
All right. And there are, you recognize that there's a spectrum of decisions that a police officer makes on a daily basis, right?
Yes.
And sometimes those decisions are calculated and thought out and take some time, and other times they're very fast, right?
Yes.
So let's assume that a police officer only pulled over black drivers. Do you think it would be okay to question why that police officer is making that decision?
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's assume that a police officer was stealing drugs from the evidence room. Is it okay to question that officer's decision?
Yes.
Let's assume that a police officer is chasing a person down a dark alley. It's dark, can't see, and suddenly that person turns and faces the police officer and points something at him. Is it okay at that, and the officer shoots and kills that person? Should that be also examined? That officer's decision?
I think it should be examined. I think that it probably already is examined.
Okay, fair enough. And you would agree, you strongly agreed with the statement that police in your community make you feel safe.
Yes.
Right. So again, I mean, it's fine to have a healthy respect for police officers, but would you just believe police officers simply by virtue of the fact that they're a police officer?
No.
You were asked a series of questions about both Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter, and you had a very unfavorable opinion of Black Lives Matter, and you wrote, "I do not agree with the guiding principles of the BLM movement. I do believe that the lives of people who happen to be black matter." So can you explain, like, what do you mean by the guiding principles of the organization?
Well, that question in particular, I mean, if that question is asking me, do I agree with the statement that Black Lives Matter? I believe that that's a true statement. I don't share I don't agree with the founding principles and a lot of the positions that the organization Black Lives Matter holds to.
Okay. So, because obviously there are kind of different layers of the statement Black Lives Matter, right?
Yes.
And there is the general sentiment, Black Lives Matter, if I'm understanding this.
Mm-hmm.
There is the movement of Black Lives Matter, and then there's an organization of Black Lives Matter.
Okay.
And are you suggesting that you disagree with the organization, but are in agreement with basically the movement and notion that Black Lives Matter?
I agree with the notion that Black Lives Matter. I don't know how to parse out the difference between the movement and the organization.
Okay, fair enough. With respect to Blue Lives Matter, you had a neutral opinion, and you wrote, "I don't know anything about that organization, but like my answer above, I believe that the lives of people who are police officers matter."
Correct.
So it's kind of the general sentiment that everybody matters.
Yes.
Okay. You have a relative who was a sheriff in the past?
Yes.
Some time ago?
Yes.
Is that person still alive and with us?
Yes.
Okay. So if you were a juror on this case, would you call your relative and say, hey, this is what they're telling me about how police officers are trained or what you're supposed to do? Can you confirm? Would you call that person for advice?
No.
Similarly, you have some friends who are in the medical profession in varying degrees. Would you call them for medical advice if you were a juror?
No.
I was interested in you were asked a series of questions and about the criminal justice system generally, and I was interested in one of your responses. You were asked, do you believe our criminal justice system works? Why or why not? And you wrote, I am not certain I understand this question properly, but I believe we have a system that, when it works correctly, is a fair and just system. I do understand that there could be instances when defendants do not receive adequate representation or sentencing guidelines may not be considered just. No system is perfect. I do think, in the main, that our justice system works. So the notion that when it doesn't work is because of an inadequacy of representation for individuals accused of crimes, is that where you think is a problem in the system?
I think that's one problem in the system.
Right. A reason to fully fund, say, the public defender's office, right?
Maybe.
Maybe. And then also just in terms of the disparity in sentencing, is that what you mean by the sentencing guidelines may not be considered just?
Yes.
Ultimately, you understand that I'm a lawyer, I represent my client, these are lawyers, they represent their client, and we're all trying to do the best we can do, right?
Yes.
Now, you were asked a question, the last question you were asked is, do you want to serve as a juror on this case? And you checked the box, not sure, right? And you wrote, this trial, like the events that led to it, will be well publicized and followed by many people. The unrest, burning, and looting following Mr. Floyd's death was troubling. It would be naive to think that similar things couldn't happen depending on the outcome of the trial. I am not sure if it is warranted, but I could have concerns about my privacy and safety. So that's
Yes.
that same notion that we started up our conversation with, right?
Yes.
Knowing what you know now, a couple months later, do you feel that you would be a fair and impartial juror in this case?
Yes.
Could you set aside your concerns about privacy and safety and listen to the evidence and judge this case based on the evidence?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I have a moment? We'll pass for cause, Your Honor.
Mr. Slusher.
Thank you, Your Honor. Juror number 87, good morning. I know you've been at it for a while and have been patient, and we thank you for that. I do want to follow up on a couple of your responses. And in one instance, I believe you responded on the survey that you believe somewhat agree with the proposition that discrimination is not as bad as the media says that it is. Do you recall that response?
I don't, but
Does that sound consistent with your belief that you somewhat agree that the media maybe overblows discrimination or exaggerates it?
yes.
Okay. So the two parts of that. First, what do you believe the media says about discrimination?
Well, by saying that I feel like they exaggerate it, I feel like the media exaggerates a lot of things. So I don't know that it would be necessarily more than other things that they exaggerate, but I feel like they may push it to a degree that stirs up controversy.
Okay.
Is that what you're looking for as an answer?
I'm just looking for your answer.
Well, I know. I meant did it answer your question?
It did. It did. But of course, now I'll have to follow up. But in that, why do you think the media does that?
I think they're not as unbiased as they always claim that they are. I guess that would be my answer.
Okay. And are there particular stories or instances that you can think of that you thought, the media is really kind of overplaying or overselling discrimination, or is it more of a generalized feeling you get from watching the news or reading the paper?
More of a generalized feeling.
Okay. Now, I'd like to compare that generalized feeling with some of your own real-life experience in how you would make that determination. So have you had conversations with close friends or family members who have experienced discrimination in their life?
Have I had them?
Yes.
Just in what areas? Any area?
Any area.
I'm sure I have, but I can't think of any off the top of my head.
How about taking it from the more general to the specific racial discrimination? Have you had conversations with friends of yours who've talked to you about racial discrimination that they may have experienced?
Yes.
And how have those conversations, I guess, compared with what you've seen on TV or read in the paper regarding the media's depiction of discrimination?
Well, you know, when you're speaking with one person, you're getting more of a personal story behind it. And so when you have those kinds of facts, it's a little easier to understand the discrimination than just a blanket discrimination story or something like that you might see.
So it sounds like you would be more inclined to believe a more personal story than you would just kind of a generalized story that you would see in the media.
Yes.
Can you share with us, without revealing, who this person would be, just what conversations have you had with friends who've experienced discrimination? What kind of discrimination have they shared with you?
Being looked at suspiciously, being categorized in certain ways. Being treated as somehow less than other people.
It's hard to hear those experiences, isn't it?
It is.
You indicated in your survey that the criminal justice system, in response to the question whether the criminal justice system is biased against racial and ethnic minorities, you indicated that you somewhat disagree with that proposition. And I'd like you to share with us a little bit, why you somewhat disagree with that proposition.
Well, I think when I answered that question, I was looking at it as how the system should work, and that we have a legal system that should work fairly for everyone. So I don't believe the system has been written in to be discriminatory.
As opposed to maybe in practice how it can work out for some people. So think of your friend who shared with you the view that from your friend's perception, they were put in a certain category or viewed suspiciously that maybe someone else in the same situation would not have been. Mm-hmm. Do you think that can bleed into the criminal justice system? After all, we are all human beings here.
Sure. Yes.
So would you then agree that the criminal justice system can be biased against racial and ethnic minorities?
I believe it could be in instances, sure. I don't know that I would agree that it is as a blanket statement, but yes. You
indicated that you and a bit of a rarity. I have not seen the video that we were talking about earlier, but you did recall seeing an image from the video. Is that right?
I'm assuming it's from the video. It was just a still picture, and I think I saw it on a news website.
Do you recall what that still picture showed?
It showed police officer. I don't think I saw Mr. Floyd. I believe there was maybe a car on the edge of the picture. And that's all I can remember seeing.
Okay. You indicated that you had an uncle who worked for about 2 decades in a fairly large department. We won't identify which one it was. Is that right? As a deputy sheriff?
Yes, yes.
Are you close with your uncle?
Not super close.
Did you ever speak with your uncle about his line of work?
I'm sure I did over the years, yeah.
Has he ever shared stories with you about, just work-related stories?
Uh-huh, yes.
Can you recall any particular instances? Usually when an officer will share a story with somebody, it won't be about the time nothing happened, right?
Right. He served papers. So he'd shared a couple stories with me where people did not react well to being served papers. And one story of being, I believe he was bit in the jail by somebody in jail. But that's really all I can remember him talking about.
Sounds like a pretty difficult job in one's line of work. You don't expect to get bitten by people.
Sure.
And you also indicated that you do have a strong trust in police officers. Is that right?
Yes.
And you did state in response to counsel's question that you believe that you could evaluate the testimony of a police officer in the same light as a non-police officer.
Yes.
But I need to ask you, if you were, say, walking down the street and you were looking for a particular place, say the IDS Center, you didn't know where it was, and there were 2 people. One was a police officer and one was a bystander. And the police officer told you that the IDS Center was to the left, and the bystander told you that the IDS Center was actually to the right. Which direction would you follow?
Probably the police officer's direction, I would assume. If he worked for the city, he would know.
And why is that? Why do you think you would follow the police officer's direction?
Because I guess I would assume that he would have had that question before, that he would have directed people in the city before.
And so based on that experience, you believe that the officer would be reliable, at least in terms of directions?
Yes.
Right. As opposed to the bystander, what would you question about the bystander's directions?
If I know nothing other than he's a bystander, I don't know that they were from the city. I don't know their background. I wouldn't assume that they knew more than the police officer knew.
I wanted to follow up with you. You indicated that your son did go to a protest.
Yes.
Did you talk to your son about going to the protest?
After, when I found out that he had gone.
Okay. This wasn't something he shared with you before?
No.
So, Mom, I'm going to a protest.
No, he did not.
Okay. What was your reaction when you found out that your son went to this protest, hadn't told you about it, found out after the fact?
He was on the 35W bridge when the truck came through. So my reaction was that I was very frightened when he called and told me that.
Okay. I recall that story. What did he tell you about it?
Well, he just told me he was on the bridge, that the truck came, that everybody ran. So.
Were you upset with him for attending the protest in the first place? Was it more that you were upset finding out, I would imagine, about the truck incident on the 35?
I was upset about the truck incident. I wasn't angry with him for going. I was more concerned for his safety.
Okay. One moment, Your Honor. Thank you very much, and thank you, ma'am, for your answers. Your Honor, the state will exercise a preemptory.
Juror 87, you're excused from this panel, so you won't have to serve on the jury, and in fact, you're excused from all jury service for now, unless we send you a summons in the future. You don't have to worry about being called about a different case during this term. Okay. So, the deputy will escort you out and take some paperwork from you, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry, I've lost track. What number was that for the state? I'm sorry, it was what number strike?
It was his 6th strike.
Okay. So you have 4 left. Got it. Before we bring the next, is the next jury coming? Okay.
Do not want
Yeah, can you hold on? Just hold them in the hallway. I just want counsel to be aware of something. Okay. Just so that council is aware, a variety of members of the media have been asking for more information about jurors or when it's going to be public, pressing us for a little more detail. And I've been emailing with the chief judge about that, and it's being communicated to the media, so I think you should be aware of what's being communicated to the media and even incorporate it in your voir dire if you wish. And that specifically is that nothing is going, we are currently releasing the race and the age decade of seated jurors. Everything else, because we have an anonymous jury, is remaining confidential. It is not being released publicly. When it will be released publicly is up to the court, and I have told Judge Barnett that I will order the release of the questionnaires and identifying information, a name, not an address, perhaps a single contact method, email, text, whatever, when I deem it safe to do so. That will be based mostly, as you all know, judges are very protective of our jurors. When I feel it is safe for the jurors, I will release their information, not before. And so if you want to incorporate that, that it's basically the court's decision to when to release such information, and the court will do so when it determines that it is safe to do so. So, because I know, Mr. Nelson, you've kind of tried to bring it up without saying what the court's going to do. I think if you can repeat that to the jurors, so, and of course that doesn't give anybody a date certain. It's my evaluation of the current situation, and at the time when a release is requested or on my own motion, it will be released when I deem it safe to do so. So, you may voir dire on that issue as well, using the court standard that has now been communicated to the media. All right, let's bring our next juror in, which is juror number 88. Good morning. If you could come right up here to this chair right next to me.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for your patience and waiting as well.
Of course.
And in fact, you were the last one from, I believe, yesterday's group.
That is correct.
So we made you come back.
Yeah.
All right. Before I turn it over to the attorneys, I'm going to take care of a few matters, ask you a few questions. First of all, I'm going to swear you in so that all your answers are under oath. If you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that you'll truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
All right, thank you. We have plexiglass between us, plexiglass in front of you. The lawyers also have plexiglass in front of them. And I am going to continue to wear a mask, even though I've had one of the shots. My point being, because of the level of protection we have, you may remove your mask when you're being examined, if it's more comfortable for you, or if you think you need to do so to speak clearly. But that's pretty much I'm leaving to you. And even if you take it off at some point, if you feel you want to put it back on, that's also okay. All right?
Okay.
Okay. First of all, you filled out a questionnaire, and thank you for doing that and getting it back to us. It gives us a lot of information to start with. Was everything true on the questionnaire?
Yes.
All right. Any changes or additions that you can think of at this point?
No.
Okay. We have found it's very common that because of the delay between when you filled it out and now, several months, that you on reflection may think, oh, I should have put this in, I should probably add that, or even that was not accurate, or I have an opinion and it's evolved. It's different than it was when I filled out the questionnaire. Both honest opinions, but just it's changed. My point is, you should feel comfortable in giving an answer that is different from the questionnaire.
Okay.
So feel free to do that. What we're looking for is, honest, candid answers. The lawyers are probably going to be directing your attention to specific questions, and they'll even read the question and your answer. Not to be disrespectful, and don't take it as confrontational. It's more to refresh your memory as to what your answer was.
Sure, I appreciate that.
And when you hear those questions, again, you might say, oh, it has changed. I do need to add something. That's perfectly understandable. All right, now the questionnaire also advised you not to read any newspaper articles, online articles, media advisory, or any media about this case. Basically, stay away from the news about this case. But, again, we understand it's been a few months since the questionnaire. You inadvertently may have been exposed to some information about this case or related cases or the parties, anything like that. Maybe see a headline that has some substance in it, or see a news report and you can't turn the channel quick enough. Has that happened to you? Have you been exposed to anything since the questionnaire till today?
I have.
Okay, tell me what you recall seeing.
While at home, I've seen things on the television, and it's just easier and quicker for me to get up and leave the room, and then my husband will either change the channel or mute it.
Okay.
But I heard something about a payout from the city.
And did you hear any specifics about the amount or anything like that?
I don't recall the amount, but I remember hearing millions.
Okay. When you filled out the questionnaire and submitted it, did you think at that time you could be a fair and impartial juror?
Yes.
Did that news that you found out about, did that move you off that position, that maybe you can no longer be impartial, or it doesn't have any effect on my partiality? I could be the same fair and impartial juror as before.
Yes, I think I can be.
Okay. Do you think, what effect do you think that hearing about that settlement will have on you?
Well, my initial reaction, of course, was shock, surprise.
Mm-hmm.
But then I just, kind of said to myself, well, I didn't hear all of it, so I don't know all of it.
Okay.
And then I just kind of brushed it away.
Okay. That's a good analogy.
Mm.
Any other information you found out about this case? And we know it's all inadvertent because you can't avoid news about this to some degree.
I do recall hearing something about some jurors, like about maybe last week, that they were up to maybe 4 jurors.
Okay.
But that's really about it.
Okay, so just the progress we're making here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The important thing to do here is not to say, I haven't read anything, I don't know anything about this case. I don't think there's anybody who knows nothing about this case.
Right.
There are varying degrees of knowledge. Some people have seen a lot, heard a lot, read a lot. Others have seen something but don't recall exactly. And the question is whether you've seen a lot or a little. Can you put all that aside and decide this case just on the evidence that you hear in the courtroom?
Yes, I believe so.
In fact, for example, getting back to that settlement, that's not going to be a part of this case because it was a different lawsuit, different parties, different laws, different issues.
Civil.
Yeah. That's an example of something you heard about, but you have to put aside because it's not going to be in this courtroom. Do you understand that?
I do.
Okay. Do you think you could do that as far as all you've heard about this case? Kind of put aside what you may have heard outside the courtroom, sweep it away, brush it away, and just focus on the evidence and follow the law that I give to you?
Yes.
And as you sit here right now, do you think you are an impartial juror?
Yes.
Okay, great. Did you recognize any witnesses that were on the witness list?
Yes.
Okay. What type of work do they do? Let's start with that.
I have no idea.
Okay. Is it just one person?
Yes.
Are they in law enforcement?
No.
Okay. Is this a neighbor, acquaintance?
An acquaintance.
Okay. Do you think if that person were to testify that you would treat them the same as any other
individuals have to be held accountable
any other
if they're assaulting
witnesses
police officers
before us?
Of course.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to order that we go off the audio. As you know, the audio is being broadcast. But I'd like to ask you a question that might be more specific and might identify yourself. So I don't want to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So I think what I'm going to do is order that under the rules that this would involve specific information that might identify the jurors, and so we'll go off audio at this time.
Another concern that some community members have raised to me and to everyone is just that I think recently there was a person killed by the name of Wanye Corey, very close to the 4th Precinct. And some people have said, why should we trust police presence to be helpful if they haven't been really responding to things so far, is the perception, especially at George Floyd Square, but also some incidents that have happened close to precincts in the city.
So the question is, why should some community members feel, why should they trust that additional police presence will...
Are they going to do their job? Are they going to help out? Or are they going to stay away because it's this autonomous zone and they don't want to engage? How is that going to work?
No, we want, and our officers will continue to engage. We still have been responding to calls in and around that area. Obviously, the environmental structure that's currently in place can make it very challenging. But whether it's the 4th Precinct or the 3rd Precinct, our folks are still going to respond. But in order for us to effectively and give a timely response, we have to open up that intersection specific to 38th in Chicago. And I Also, just again, we have, like you mentioned, the 4th Precinct, 3rd Precinct. We are still dealing with a significant violent crime issue from last year, and we're trying to make sure that we can make a dent in that as we get into the warmer weather months. We are down in terms of personnel, as I know you're aware. We're relying upon the collaboration of a lot of the help from Office of Violence Prevention, community groups out there, whether it be Mother's Love or Mother's Love. We have folks over in the Little Earth community who patrols that are helping as well to keep neighborhoods safe. And so it's going to take a collaborative effort and mutual aid. Again, whether it's Chief Frizzell of the Metro Transit Police or the Sheriff Hutch's team's helping us out. But we're going to continue to show up to be in spaces to keep our communities safe, and we're going to work in collaboration with those communities.
Chief, is this still a post-Chauvin trial? Is this still a post-Chauvin trial effort to open 38th in Chicago?
I'm sorry, Liz was up next. Thank you.
She had a question. I thought it'd be my turn.
And I'm sorry.
I wasn't here yesterday with your press conference. Is this 38th in Chicago idea still a post-Chauvin trial reopening?
Oh, the question is the reopening in terms of basically the timeline. Is it something that will occur after the trial date? We are not going to, and I've been in daily conversations with the mayor, and as he has stated, and as I agree with him wholeheartedly, we are not going to let the trial dictate when it's the right time to safely open up that intersection. And so we are not, the plans that I will be presenting to Mayor Fry will not be based upon the trial timeline. It's going to be based on that public safety need.
One last question for Liz.
Chief, there was talk earlier about relying on overtime for some of this work. Do you have a cost estimate, and how does that impact your budget? Also, separately, there is some video of officers at a homeless camp this morning that has some folks in the community troubled. Have you seen that? Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the two questions. The first question was some of the extra patrols will be utilizing Minneapolis Police Department budget overtime. And so I don't have the numbers on that. We are absolutely tracking that. One of the reasons, again, why overtime is part of that consideration is just because, again, our resources. We don't have as many resources as we'd like to, and so we need to at least offer that option of overtime to make sure we're conducting those patrols. As for this morning's situation dealing with the encampment, from the limited video that I have seen, I was appalled by the actions of those community members that attacked my officers. I am thankful that they were not seriously injured. When I see video of individuals on top of my officers assaulting them, and some were arrested, and they should be held accountable for that. Minneapolis Police Department was not going about that alone. We were working in conjunction with other city enterprises, our health department, our CPED, and others to find adequate shelter for those individuals. Matter of fact, our officers were not even at the actual site of the encampment. They were a block away when they were confronted by these individuals, these suspects. And so I will not tolerate individuals attacking or assaulting our officers. And so I'm thankful that they did not suffer any serious injuries. We are out there, the mayor, homelessness, and trying to make sure that those experiencing homelessness have proper and adequate and rightful shelter. But we cannot start attacking public safety people to try to give them help and assistance. So.
We're done. We're done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, can you take a few more questions, please? You just talked about transparency and the effort. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. First, about 38th in Chicago, Mr. Mayor. We asked the chief yesterday some of these same questions, and it seemed like it's really a discussion between you and him on when to open it back up and the community. What do you think is when is the right time for public safety to open that square back up? I mean, yeah.
I think in deciphering when the right time to open an intersection for public safety purposes, that decision, I believe, is heavily rests on the chief. I trust expertise. I believe in the expertise of Chief Arredondo. He and I have been lockstep throughout. And no, I'm not budging. So, I understand that this is a very important place of racial justice and healing. I understand the importance of retaining and having the legacy of George Floyd be honored in true form. And we have an obligation, a paramount obligation as a city to keep people safe. right now, the uptick in violence around that area is absolutely unacceptable. And I will be taking the chief's recommendation very seriously, giving it very heavy weight as it comes forward with respect to the timing itself. Go ahead.
With respect to the settlement, did you go to Chief Justice or Chief Judge Barnett to seek his opinion on this settlement prior to announcing it and its potential effect on the criminal case?
So I have not been at all involved in that as the mayor of the city of Minneapolis. And I don't know to what extent Jim can comment any further. But again, we've gotten very clear direction from the judge not to comment on legal proceedings, not to comment on the evidence or circumstances of the case. And we feel very strongly that the integrity of the judicial process is best upheld by us not getting involved there. As you know, the judge will be making a decision tomorrow on those very concepts, and we'll be able to determine at that point whether there are any changes or whether the trial will proceed as planned.
Mr. Raptor, you had mentioned there were still some things that need to happen in federal court regarding that settlement. Is there a timeline when you expect to have that all wrapped up?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. Basically, process how we move forward on the settlement and finalizing it. The papers need to be finalized between the parties, and ultimately, then it needs to. This is an active lawsuit in federal court here in Minnesota. It needs to be filed with the court, approved by the judge. Roughly a month, but some of that's not in our control. I mean, would you say that's about a rough estimate?
Trying to pin down, why does it take sort of a month?
Well, one, I'm allowing for, I can't control how fast the court will do their part of that, what I just described. So I'm just trying to be prudent.
Mr. Raptor.
I mean, if you really want, I mean, this is the person actually working through the documents. There's nothing sexy here, but.
Brian Carter, Assistant City Attorney. So, you know, these types of settlements happen all, you know, frequently in federal court, and they happen according to sort of a normal procedure. So once we have
all right, we are back on audio after
council,
a discussion with the juror. They have been excused by the court for cause. Reminder to the press that there's no reporting of the substance of an off-the-record or rather off-audio discussion. It is, in essence, an in-camera examination. So with that, let's take a 20-minute break. Let's come back at 10 minutes to 11. Thank you.
Keeping details to close out that case. The time frame that takes varies from case to case. I would expect in this matter we're looking on the order of a month or so. Thank you.
Mr. Rowder, my last question.
Thank you very much.
Last question, I swear. Please. You said that, for me, yeah, you said that that the deal might not have been available after the trial. What did you mean by that?
The question is, what did I mean by saying the deal may not have been available at another time?
Yeah.
I think that's pretty clear. The bottom line is there was no guarantees that that deal would be available at a different point in time and under different circumstances.
Meaning you might have to pay more after the trial?
It would be irresponsible for me to speculate to that. And again, I think we're getting close to talking about something that the judges over in the criminal proceeding right now would just prefer that we not discuss.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
I'm happy to
Today we're demanding payment.
Right.
And we believe the only way to eliminate the wealth gap is through reparations.
The wealth gap in this country is 90%. Whites have 90% of the wealth, blacks have 2.9% of the wealth. So the only real way to close the wealth gap is by paying reparations. The slave owners were given reparations when they released their slaves. So we feel it's important that the American descendants of slavery who built this country be compensated for slavery.
Reparations, not only, my great grandma was a slave. Her mother and father were slaves. Maddie Mae in Memphis, Tennessee. They have hung my uncles. They locked my father up while he went to Vietnam and had to go on the front lines in the jungle. When he came back from Chicago, when they treated him messed up, and then he was in the hood, he got shot up over south where George got killed. We have to talk about the historical pieces.
Our proposal would be like if your family was here, if you're black and you've been here since 1965, so like if your family went through sharecropping, Jim Crow, the lynching period, redlining and redistricting, those type of things would be the determinant. It also is going to deal with police brutality, fixing our criminal injustice system, addressing medical issues, addressing the business component. So the St. Paul Recovery Act will put taxes on menthol, cigarette. It would start with like all tobacco products. Then there would be a fund, and that money would be put into the reparations, the St. Paul Recovery Act, and distributed to the American descendants of slavery.
The best way to address police brutality is through reparations. The best way to help to address the housing gap in America. 50% of the people who are homeless in America are descendants of slavery. The health gap in America. African Americans were experimented on during slavery, and we still see this economic injustice today. We feel the best way to address universal health care is wonderful, a beautiful concept, but it does not address the historical injustices in America's health care system. Universal health care is a great concept, and I believe in it, but it will not address the historical trauma that black women went through by being experimented on during slavery, or the sterilization projects that took place, or the Tuskegee experiments that took place. Universal health care won't address that, but reparations will.
St. Paul has some of the worst disparities in the country when it's dealing with education, when it's dealing with housing, when it's dealing with medical, when it's dealing with unemployment. St. Paul itself or Ramsey County did an anti-racism study which said that their policies and procedures pathologize the black family, and it's not enough just to give job training. There needs to be reparations and compensation for what happened to Rondo was similar to what happened in places like Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Rosewood.
The murder of George Floyd, like we were saying, his family had 500 acres taken from him, taken from his great-grandfather. A lot of wealth in America is built off generational wealth. So when housing and property or businesses are passed down from one generation to another, that creates generational wealth. White America or slavery or institutional racism stole that from black lives who are descendants of slavery.
George Floyd really has been a catalyst for pushing these larger demands of divesting from the police and abolishing the police. You know, we've seen like, 5 to 10 different organizations cut ties with the police already, so really it's feeling like we're getting nearer to liberation, and it just hurts that, you know, it has to come at the expense of like people's lives being lost, but, you know, again, it's a catalyst, and I feel like we're trying to organize around that and I really love the outpouring of just support, the resource, the networking, the mutual aid. I feel like that's really the coming together. We were just talking about how, like, if there's always this much food and water, like, why can't we just always have it like this? You know what I'm saying? We have the capacity to create these mechanisms that are keeping each other safe and fed and taken care of.
Can you give us a synopsis of what you think a world without police looks like?
Definitely just money going into mental health services. I'm talking like therapists, counselors, you know, family therapists, relationship therapists, like really giving mental health the funding and the attention that it needs. And really, when we talk about abolishing the police and like transformative justice, really transforming the conditions that allow for crime to happen and allow for injustices to happen. So when we're building up these super tight support networks of getting people the food that they need, making sure people have money to pay rent, making sure people are right in their minds and having the healing and holistic health that they need, I feel like when we push all of those just kind of general wellness, that sets the groundwork to be able to abolish the police. And when we say that we're going to transform the conditions that we live in to allow us to be our best selves, I feel like that's what's going to be the potential for us to like not need this sort of oppressive militaristic force on us already. So definitely plugging into mental health sources, plugging into kind of like restorative justice, community-based like forums, whatnot, you know, all of this is really, like, I love the imagining portion because I feel like it's really hard for people to imagine what life is like outside of the police. It's easy for people to imagine like the end of the world, but how do you imagine a utopia for yourself, you know what I'm saying? So just imagine a world where everybody has everything that they need, and it's like, why would you need police if we're all taken care of, if nobody has to steal and shit on other people, you know?
Hey, what's up everyone? This is Dan at Unicorn Riot. Thanks for tuning in today. So we've been watching jury selection and motions happen before that earlier, and expecting more rulings on the motions tomorrow from Judge Cahill. So, again, thanks for tuning in. Unicorn Riot is a 501c3 nonprofit educational media organization, and we try to bring you to the front edge of social issues and track the root causes of social problems and developments in our world. We have heard about earlier today that the police tried to attack an encampment on the north side of Minneapolis, and videos have started to come out from that incident, but the latest we've heard is that the camp is still intact. And I cut over to a live press conference that was happening with the city officials, with the chief of police, with Mayor Fry, and they were, pushing to shove people out of an encampment without anywhere else to go, and that was something that was touched upon in the press conference. And the police chief seems to be floating some kind of plan involving a lot of federal officials to try to get control of George Floyd Square again, or get it reopened, or it's still very unclear what they're planning, and I wouldn't say that we have details right now, but something's definitely going on, and they're trying to roll it out in those press conferences. So we are definitely paying attention to that and trying to analyze that, and what the people affected by this kind of policy proposal have to say about such a thing. So we just, I made the call to kind of show that because I felt it was an important development unfolding this morning although obviously it's pretty disconcerting when they're just basically kind of floating a plan to steamroll everybody, it appears to be. So we're going to wait a little bit for court to come back. I think it was expected within the next couple minutes. So I'm just going to leave it on the live feed here. Thanks again for tuning in. If you can support our work at unicornriot.ninja/donate. A small detail, which was kind of funny, was that the judge actually lost track of how many strikes that the state had left. So, it's a little tricky to follow the strikes. So that was a bit of a lighter moment in terms of things that the judge said today. So again, thanks for tuning in. Take a look at our website if you get a chance, unicornriot.ninja. We have a lot of good stuff, not just about the George Floyd uprising, but also about stuff like Line 3, things like that. And, we've been reporting from a lot of different places, whether it's, South Africa, one of our members is down there in South Africa, or sometimes we've, taken contributor work from Brazil, and we've reported from other places like Greece and Germany. So, we've really tried to kind of, dive deep and sometimes travel far and get the word from people in a lot of locations around the world, not just in the United States, but outside of it. So, we really appreciate your support. And, just let us know what you think. And please tell your friends. It's not necessarily easy to play the independent media game these days, and we definitely count on your support to kind of help get the word out, to sort of let your friends know what's going on. So thanks again so much for tuning in today, and we really appreciate your support. Again, we're on at twitch.tv/unicorn_riot. We just got over 400 followers this morning, which is really appreciated, and the friendly discussions there as well as the folks on Facebook at facebook.com/unicornriot.ninja. That's also terrific to have these chats and sort of have a regular place to check in. And we do really appreciate the support. Obviously, it's pretty wrenching to see Minneapolis go through all this and the difficulties and things like sweeps of homeless camps and a fortified downtown and just the problems going on there. So we are having there's been some odd things going on with the back-end video system, so I have to take care of that right now. Just stand by and we'll be back as soon as we can. Thank you. It looks like the video came back. So I don't want to dive too much to under the hood, but we've built out a new video system to process this stuff, and it can be a little interesting. The video system can cause odd things to happen, and so that's why it kicked over to an exit sign. But I believe it is actually working correctly right now, which is good. So they're on recess right now, and it seemed like they would be back roughly around now. I'm not sure exactly the minute-to-minute timing. So thanks again for tuning in, everyone. I'm just going to leave the feed open as we wait for them to come back. Thank you. Again, hey, this is Dan from Unicorn Riot again. Just to clarify, the exit sign you see right now is the live feed from the courtroom. So we are getting the live video right now, and it seems to be working. So again, I don't want to get too much into the plumbing, but this is the live image that we're getting right now. We're passing it straight to you. So thanks again for tuning in today.
interesting about this whole vordering of the jury is that it becomes more and more obvious that what's really going on is that it's going to be difficult to sit or seat honest people. Black people are not going to be able to get on this jury, not honest black people, because the juror who was rejected today, the only black woman that's been there, said, look, I can't unsee what I saw, right? And so what the system is trying to do is get you to accept. So it's going to be difficult, I think, to convict this guy because the system has its own set of rules. And if you play by their set of rules, it may be that Derek Chauvin is innocent. As crazy as it may sound by the system. And so I've noticed when they were talking to the jurors, what the lawyers are pretty much saying is that, hey, if the conclusion that you arise, if it violates your sense of morality, are you willing to do that? If it violates your values, are you willing to do that? And in order to be on a jury, you have to say yes. It's a tough deal. So this is paradoxical. On the one hand, yes, everybody should have their day in court. I totally agree with that. But on the other hand, it's really going to be difficult to seat a fair jury in a community that's already been properly. I'm going to write this piece. It's going to be difficult to find a fair jury in a rigged population. Yes, because a lot of the people who are going to qualify for, or they're going to think qualify, are folks who have a certain perspective, right, that allows them to see things from the perspective of the police. It's a tough deal. You've got to lay down your values and your sense of morality and say, okay, I accept these parameters. And that's kind of shaky.
I'm protecting my business. People, is angry and stuff, so all I'm doing is trying to protect it, and so we can stay here and be able to serve the community afterwards. We are a black business, black-owned business. With that being said, we don't need to be tore down. Look, we don't need to be tore down, and we don't need to be taking no dramatic losses when we've been taking losses all our lives, So I don't want to be the one to take a loss at this time when I finally changed my life over. So
Press. We're coming. We're pressed. We're coming. Yo! That's how they do business owners here. That's how they doing business owners.
Man, we protected our shit. That's all we was doing. Fuck them. We protected our shit.
He's asking them to come outside.
Man, get the fuck away from my shit. I'll pay rent here. Fuck out of here. Fuck y'all, bitch. Fuck you, bitch.
You own a business and then they coming on me. Y'all seen that? I didn't even do nothing. We didn't do nothing. They forced you all in. Like, come on, we protecting our business. People trying to tear up our business. What we supposed to do? We ain't got no guns or nothing. So, man. Man, this is what I did not want to feel, man. I did not want to feel this way. I didn't want to feel this way, man. Hey, man. Okay. Yeah, man, I'll talk about it, man. Sorry for that, y'all, man. You know what I mean? No, I ain't sorry. No, I'm not. Definitely not. I don't give a damn. I stand for something, and I'm not falling for anything. And that was some bullshit, you know what I mean? We didn't do nothing, man. We sitting here just trying to protect the business. You coming by interviewing me, We was peaceful around here all this time, man. So, just a little hot. But anyways, man, I'm going to go back to the business part of it, Chill plant-based started, after, my cousin Flandel Castile, and it brought something good out of it, and I can see that in this too, it gets to a point where it's so bad where it turns good, and it's gonna be a good situation out there because God got his hands on this situation at all times. It's not just how I feel. God had his hands on me, and that's how I ended up with, where we standing at now, I don't give it the honor to no one but the Creator, He's the one who made this happen for me, and it's just so frustrating, man, and in my heart right now, I'm just tingling in my heart because, man, like, the family that's hurt right now and all that, man, and then just like we sitting here and they ready to shoot us and just over some stuff that we never had no part of, so Man, I'm just praying for the world, man, America, man. Damn, this is just crazy, man.
This is the precinct right here, the people that breached. People are breaking all the windows. People are in the parking lot area, burning the spy cams. Wow. They literally are trying to set this on fire.
They set it on fire!
People breached the precinct. Doesn't smell like tear gas. People are coming out with riot gear. This is the 3rd precinct. There's a fire started. This is the 3rd precinct right here. It has got ran through. Fires are starting in multiple rooms. The 3rd precinct. The precinct where the officers were employed. Again, this is for George Floyd, murdered by Minneapolis police officers from the 3rd precinct. This is what they were drinking on their breaks.
Juror was acquainted with one of the witnesses in this case, who is a central person in the state's case and would be testifying about fairly sensitive material. I think her acquaintance, which is close enough for her to bring it up, and the court evaluated it, thought that it was too close a connection to a central witness that a cause challenge would be appropriate, or a cause excusal would be appropriate. I would note that given the nature of the witness's testimony who's going to be testifying, that it could affect the witness's testimony in that they look out and they see an acquaintance who they know, and it would be, I'm sure, uncomfortable for them first to share it in front of a jury, but then a jury that it contains someone they know. So for all those reasons, the court, on its own motion, granted the cause challenge. And we'll move to the next group, which is a group advisory before we begin. Anything else for the record, though? Mr. Larson, you want to check in the hallway and see if, you'll know what I mean. All right, take any seat that's available. right, good morning. Be seated. First of all, can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Great. And when I ask some questions, there may be yes or no. If it's yes, raise your hand in response. Well, first of all, my name is Pete Cahill, and I'm one of the judges of the District Court. And you have been summoned as potential jurors in the case of State of Minnesota versus Derek Chauvin, which is a criminal case related to the death of George Floyd on May 25th, 2020. A person charged with a crime has a right to a fair trial before an impartial judge and an impartial jury. In order to make sure that the jurors who are selected are impartial, the law provides that the court and the attorneys for the parties may ask questions, which must be answered under oath. First, thank you for filling out and returning the questionnaire that was mailed to you. Your contribution to the important and serious matter at hand is best assured by continuing to provide full and complete answers to the questions that you're going to be asked today. Those questions will follow up on issues from the questionnaire, but also other topics. Now, after the questioning is over, the attorneys will have the right to excuse some of you from service on this jury, and I may excuse others of you for what is called cause. In either case, it does not mean that you are not a fair person, and you should not take offense in being excused. Also ask that you not take any offense at any question that might be asked. We must pry, to some extent, in order to explore opinions you might hold and to discuss experiences that you've had that might affect your ability to serve in this case. Now, the defendant, Mr. Chauvin, has been charged with murder in the second degree and manslaughter in the second degree. Now, in the normal course of a trial, charges may be added or subtracted from that, but those are the charges as it stands. To the charges, the defendant has entered a plea of not guilty, which is a denial of each and every material allegation in the charges. I'm now going to have the participants introduce themselves to you. The question being, do you have an acquaintance or a friendship with any of these people, or even a professional relationship? So, first for the state.
Good morning. My name is Steve Slisher, and I represent the state of Minnesota.
Hello, my name is Christina Marinakis, and I'm assistant with the prosecution.
Joshua Larson, also representing the state of Minnesota.
Good morning, Erin Eldridge for the state of Minnesota.
And Mr. Nelson, if you could introduce your client and yourself.
Good morning, my name is Eric Nelson, along with Christina Bass. We represent the defendant, Derek Chauvin.
Anybody recognize, have a relationship with anybody who's introduced themselves? Does anybody recognize, have a relationship with somebody who is in the courtroom other than those who have introduced themselves? All right, thank you. Other members of the Office of the Minnesota Attorney General might also be appearing in this case. Does anybody know Attorney General Keith Ellison, Jerry Blackwell, or anyone else who works for the Office of the Minnesota Attorney General? Okay, no hands, thank you. Now, you have been given a copy of a list of potential witnesses. Please review it before you are questioned individually. The question is going to be if you know anyone on that list. Now, one of the things the attorneys may not do during jury selection is to instruct you on the law. But I do want you to be aware of some of the basic concepts that apply in all criminal cases, so that you may keep them in mind as you answer the court's and the attorney's questions. So I will instruct you as follows. First, the charges against the defendant are not evidence, and they create no inference of guilt. No member of this jury should in any way permit himself or herself to be prejudiced against the defendant because a charge has been made or because he has been placed on trial. The defendant is presumed innocent of the charges made against him, and in order for you to find the defendant guilty, the state must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant does not have to prove his innocence. The presumption of innocence remains with the defendant throughout the trial, unless and until he has been proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt according to the law and the evidence admitted at trial. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is such proof as ordinarily prudent men and women would act upon in their most important affairs. A reasonable doubt is a doubt based upon reason and common sense. It does not mean a fanciful or capricious doubt, nor does it mean beyond all possibility of doubt. If you serve on this jury, you and your fellow jurors will be the sole judges of whether a witness is to be believed and of the weight to be given a witness's testimony. There are no hard and fast rules to guide you in this respect. In determining believability and weight of testimony, jurors may take into consideration the witness's interest or lack of interest in the outcome of the case, relationship to the parties, ability and opportunity to know, remember, and relate the facts, their manner, their age and experience, their frankness and sincerity, or the lack thereof, the reasonableness or the unreasonableness of their testimony in light of all the other evidence in the case, and any other factors that bear on believability and weight. If on this jury, you should rely in the last analysis upon your own experience, good judgment, and common sense. Now, there are certain things you should not do during jury selection. You are not investigators. You are not to go out to do any looking, and you are not to ask people about this matter. You are not to use the internet to look for information about this case or about the law. Above all, you must not talk to anyone who is involved, the lawyers, witnesses, or spectators. They know that it would be improper to contact you except through the normal selection process, and they will confine themselves to a brief greeting. So please do not be offended if the attorneys, witnesses, or spectators do not speak to you. During the selection process, your family and friends will be curious as to what you are doing. You may tell them you are on a panel of potential jurors in a criminal case, and that is all you should tell them. Since that is all you should tell family and friends, that is all you should tell the general public. So please, during these proceedings, please refrain from using Facebook, Twitter, or other social media to announce that you are a potential juror or to comment on this trial. You may access those social media tools, hopefully avoiding any news coverage that might be in those media tools, but please do not publish any information about this case or your thoughts about this case. You do not have to stay away from people and refuse to speak to them. Do whatever you wish, but do not talk about this case and do not talk at all to anyone involved in it. Because of the nature of the charges, this case is receiving media coverage. Do not read about this case in the newspaper or online or in your social media, and do not listen to news about it on radio or television. Now, this trial, including jury selection, is being televised, but no video of you or other jurors, any other juror, will be taken at any time, now or during trial if you are selected. Also, your name will not be used in the courtroom. You will only be referred to by your random number to respect your privacy. The audio of anything you say will be broadcast, unless we need to discuss something deeply personal or extremely sensitive or embarrassing, and I specifically order the audio to not be broadcast. And you might hear me, unfortunately, use one of our legal phrases for it as an in-camera examination. That does not mean cameras. It means in private. That's the problem when we use legal jargon sometimes. So if you hear me say that phrase, you're not going on camera. So please understand that. As I said, generally your audio will be broadcast, but if there is anything extremely sensitive, embarrassing, deeply personal, or in this case, if it would tend to identify you, we will go off audio so that the only people who can hear the audio are the people who are in this room. In that case, as I said, you'll still have to answer questions and it will still be part of the record, but without audio or video broadcast. All right, with the exception of juror number 89, check my notes, who will remain. The other juror will go back with the deputy to the other courtroom to wait. Feel free to use all the hand sanitizer you want. All right. I'm going to put my mask back on and ask juror number 89 to come on up here to the witness stand. Good morning. Have a seat. Before we begin, I'm going to swear you in so that all your answers are under oath. So raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
Okay. All right. It looks like you are able to project your voice, so I'm not concerned about picking up your voice, but if you could just move a little closer. We have plexiglass in front of you, between us, and also the lawyers have their own plexiglass screen in front of them. I'm going to continue to wear my mask, but the point being, you can take yours off
Thank you.
If at any time you want to put it back on, feel free. I leave the mask or unmask entirely to you. These precautions should be enough if you are unmasked. Okay. A few questions I have before I turn it over to the attorneys. First of all, you filled out the questionnaire, and thank you for doing so. A lot of good information for us to start with. Is everything on the questionnaire true?
Yes.
Okay. Any changes or additions to the questionnaire?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of a general question. When the attorneys are asking you questions, it may prompt a memory, and you may want to add something that wasn't on the questionnaire.
Okay.
And we understand it was a couple months ago that you filled out the questionnaire. Since then, in reflection, you may realize there's something you should have added, or something was inaccurate, or even your opinion that you held is now evolved in some way. Regardless, the point being, I want you to be comfortable giving an answer, if it's honest, that is different or additional to the questionnaire. Okay?
Okay.
You were not supposed to read any articles. The questionnaire advised you to avoid the media about this case. We recognize a couple things. It's been a couple months, and the news coverage has been extensive, even as recently as this week and last week. And so the question I have for you is, did you inadvertently, despite your best efforts, inadvertently get exposed to any news coverage, a headline, a blurb on the TV news before you could leave the room, anything
Yes.
like that?
Yes.
Yeah. What did you learn?
The city of Minneapolis settlement.
Okay.
I heard that on the headline radio.
Okay. And what details did you learn? Any amounts? Or?
The amount.
Okay. What do you recall it to be?
27 million.
All right. Anything else you know about the settlement, other than there was a settlement for $27 million?
No.
Okay. When you filled out the questionnaire, I think I know this by now. I think it was question 10 in the first part. Asked you if you could be a fair and impartial jury, and you said yes. That was when you filled out the questionnaire. Has any of the news you've heard, like even in addition to that settlement discussion, has that moved you in any way off of being impartial?
I don't think so.
Okay, tell me about that. What effect do you think it would have on you, if any?
Boy. I don't know. I want to consider all sides.
Okay.
I know I've turned off the radio or television,
Okay.
change the channels when any news stories come, but I don't know how it. I'm doing my best to avoid it.
Oh yeah,
So-
and we know everybody has. It's almost impossible.
Right.
And so every juror I think who's come in has said since they filled out the questionnaire they've been exposed to some inadvertently. It's
Right.
not, despite your best efforts. We understand that. The question is, do you think that hearing about, for example, that settlement or any other fact, do you think that's going to bias you in some way? And maybe you're here, you're fair and impartial, you're kind of neutral in the middle. Did that move the needle at all, that you might be pushed towards one side or the other?
I don't think so.
Okay. And the attorneys will probably follow up on that. But I'm just essentially going to advise you that's not going to be in evidence. It's a different case, different parties, different legal issues, different laws that apply. Can you accept that?
Yes.
Okay. And not just settlement, generally everything you've heard about, even before you filled out the questionnaire, and knew that you might be a juror in this case. Can you put everything you've heard before today aside, if you're a juror, and decide the case just on what you hear in the courtroom, and to decide it according to the laws I give it to you?
I believe I can.
Okay, great. I'll shift to an easier question. Did you recognize any witnesses that are on the witness list?
I did not.
Okay. We estimate that this trial will be 4 weeks once we start, and then deliberation after that, or as part of the 4 weeks. As you've already seen, there can be a little delay every now and then that we don't anticipate. Can you make that time frame work for your personal, professional life?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions for me before I turn you over to the attorneys?
I don't think so.
All right. Then with regard to the juror number 89, Mr. Nelson, you may inquire.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience. We know things do get a little delayed here and there. So, few questions I'm going to ask you initially, just kind of general questions, get to know you, kind of how you think a little bit. And then I want to follow up with some of your responses to the questionnaire. Again, we know it was a couple months ago you filled it out, so we're not trying to trick you. I'll actually just read you what you wrote, okay?
Good. Yes.
I think only one person has actually kept a copy of it so far.
Okay.
Let's assume you and I met under a different circumstance. We're at some sort of a social event, and we're engaged in conversation, our first conversation. What are a couple things I learn about you during that conversation?
I'm a nurse. I live alone.
What do you like to do in your spare time?
Oh, I read, I watch television, I visit my nieces and nephews.
Great. And you live here in the cities generally?
In Edina. Mm-hmm.
All right. If you obviously had heard about this case before you got your jury summons, right?
Yes.
And you had certain knowledge, or you had learned things from the news, right?
Yes.
Maybe talk to friends about it, form some opinions, etc. But then you learned, because you received this packet, that you're a potential juror in this case. So what was your initial reaction to learning that you were going to be a potential juror in this case?
Ambivalence. It's a big case with the media, and I think it'll have a lot of repercussions on a lot of lives. So, not real excited about it. So,
Okay. Fair enough. Well, let me ask you: did you have concerns about your personal or physical safety? Did you have concerns about COVID? Did you?
Maybe safety after the trial.
Okay.
Would be my concern.
Well, let me ask you: when you got to the government center, were you here yesterday?
I was not.
Okay, my days are kind of running together here. So, when you got to the government center this morning and you kind of saw the state of things down here, what was your reaction to that?
I didn't really see much. I drove around the block a number of times, trying to find the parking entrance, but I don't know, insecurity coming in, you know.
Right. I mean, it's not normal to see Humvees and machine guns downtown Minneapolis.
I did not see that. So.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
No.
All right. Well, does the security that they have installed, does that make you feel better about your personal safety during the trial? Ambivalent? Less safe?
I feel safe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. When the judge this afternoon or this morning told you that we're doing what we can to protect your anonymity, how did that make you feel?
Reassured.
Okay. Now, ultimately, at some point, you know, your name may be released to the public. Do you understand that?
Yes.
And ultimately, we don't know when that will be, but it will be when the court feels that it's safe to do so. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Does that make you feel better?
Kind of.
Okay. Why only kind of?
Yeah, I don't know how comfortable I am with my name being out there afterwards.
Okay. I mean, even if it's a long time down the road?
Well, maybe, but you know, I've seen Dateline where they've interviewed jurors and stuff, and I wouldn't want any part of that.
Okay. So, you know, you can obviously choose to talk to people or not talk to people, but
Correct.
You understand that at some point, I guess let's put it this way. If you were selected as a juror, right, and you're tasked with rendering a verdict in this case, would your concerns about your anonymity, would it influence your decision-making process?
I don't think so.
Would you be more inclined to vote one way or another based on what you perceive the public reaction would be to that verdict?
No.
Okay, good. Now, again, I understand you're a nurse, and we don't want you to identify where you work, or the type of nursing you do. But I'm assuming in the course of your professional career or in the course of your personal life, at some point you have been called upon to resolve conflict between two or more people, right?
Yes.
How do you generally approach the resolution of conflict?
I listen to each side and try and restate what I've heard, and come up with a solution.
Okay,
So,
fair enough. Obviously, this case may involve quite a few numbers of conflict, right?
yes.
There's obviously the big conflict between Mr. Chauvin and the state of Minnesota. That's one thing you'll have to resolve. There may be conflicts that emerge in the jury room, or there may be conflict between testimony of two witnesses. Right? So I just kind of want to talk about those.
Okay.
Ultimately, in terms of the big context or the big conflict, are you the type of, or would you be able to pay attention to the evidence as it's presented in court, decide this case based on the evidence alone, and kind of ignore everything else that you've heard from before?
I believe I could.
All right. I have to press you a little bit on
Yes.
that. Can you, or do you simply believe you can?
I can.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, in terms of, imagine you're in the jury room, and there's conflict that emerges between two groups of jurors, right? And you're not really sure what you think yet, right, about whatever the issue may be. It's hard to put it in the abstract, obviously, but so you have two groups that are different. How do you approach the resolution of that kind of conflict to try to build consensus?
Well, if I'm on one side versus another, of course I'll state why I believe this. And if I'm in the middle and not undecided, I would want to listen to both sides.
Okay. Kind of see what pieces of information
they're pulling as important, or
Okay.
as relatable.
Do you think is it a remarkably different analysis if you're undecided and kind of neutral on the issue versus having a position or being involved in the conflict yourself? So let me put it in I know it's very broad and abstract way to ask a question. Let's assume that you have not made up your mind about a particular issue in this case.
Okay.
And what you're saying is you're going to listen to these two sides, you're going to hear both sides, and then you're going to use that information to form your own opinion in one hand. Is the analysis different if you've already made up your mind, right? If you say, I know what I think about this issue, do you approach that differently?
I think so.
How so?
I'd probably give more weight to my opinion than somebody else's.
Okay. So are you the type of person that will simply agree with someone else just to build consensus and get this over with?
No.
Okay. Are you willing to re-examine your own opinions and listen to the other side?
Yes.
Good. Now, again, within the context of conflict in the case, you may have two witnesses that are observing the same event, and they may perceive that event to be completely different, right? How do you resolve that type of conflict in terms of, should we believe this person's perception, or should we believe that person's perception?
Well, and with my background of work, I know everybody has different perceptions of seeing the same event. I'd probably have to weigh each one and decide, if they're very conflicting, why that is.
Okay. And so, I mean, what tools do you bring to that analysis? I mean, do you look at what other people may say? Do you look at what other evidence there may be? Right? I mean, how like, as a way of explaining it?
Yeah, definitely. I would say evidence, notes made during questioning.
Okay, fair enough. Can you think of a situation in your life where you were 100% certain about something, only later to learn you were wrong?
Yes.
Okay. How do you react to that type of a situation?
Well, try and admit that I was wrong.
Okay. Do you take that experience and apply it to future
Yeah.
events, or
Yes.
do you kind of blow it off?
No, definitely don't jump to conclusions.
Okay, great. Now, again, your role, you would be considered what's called a judge of the facts. And your job is to decide what happened here in this particular case, right? And at the end of the case, the judge is going to present you with the rules of law that you need to apply. And you may read those rules and you may disagree. You may think that the judge is wrong, or you may think that the law should be changed, right? Can you follow the law as the judge gives it to you, even if you disagree with the judge, or you think the law should be changed?
Yes, that's the law.
Okay, fair enough. I'm going to follow up with just a few questions on your questionnaire. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to fill this out. Your answers were very thorough, and we all appreciate that. There's a series of questions and references to a video that you may have seen, and I think you said 4 or 5 times, something like that. The video, there were several videos that were released publicly. There's what we refer to as a bystander video, there are body-worn cameras, and there were some surveillance videos that were released. Which videos or videos do you think you've seen?
I don't know, probably bystander.
Okay.
On the news.
All right. It appeared to be someone standing off to the side.
Behind the police car.
Okay. And did you watch that video in its entirety?
No, I did not.
Okay. When you say you saw it 4 to 5 times, are you referring to bits
pieces?
Was that presented in the media, or did you just see scrolling through Facebook?
Yeah, no, it would have been on television.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you that you try not to talk over each other.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because it makes it hard for the court to do the record now.
Thank you.
And it's a normal part of conversation when we're out on the street, but we have to be a little more formal
Here, so Mr. Nelson, if you would.
Thank you, Your Honor. So that video that you're referencing, you saw bits and pieces of it on the news a few times.
Yes.
Right? But you never went onto the internet, downloaded the whole video, and watched it from start to finish?
No, I did not.
Okay. You were asked to recite what you recall from hearing about this case on the questionnaire. I have a few questions about that. You understand that the police were called to a store, a grocery store is how you describe it, and that the police attempted to arrest or place Mr. Floyd in the back of a police car. He resisted, citing claustrophobia, and ended up on the ground beside the police car. Right. Do you remember seeing that in that video, or did you just hear about that in the news? How did you learn that information?
Yeah, I don't remember seeing that. Probably heard it through the news on TV.
Okay. Because you write, this is what I know from the video that was broadcast around the world. So I just want to, maybe you did see other videos, or you just heard discussion of other videos?
Probably discussion. I don't remember seeing how he got on the ground.
Okay. And then you wrote that the police continued to restrain George Floyd in this manner, meaning with his, I believe you said, officers were kneeling on his body. You said police continued to restrain George Floyd in this manner for 7 or 8 minutes until he was no longer conscious and or moving. I do not know what happened to George Floyd after he was no longer conscious or alive. Fair statement of what you recall from this?
Yes.
All right. Being a nurse, right, do you think that you would view that type of evidence differently than an average citizen?
Probably.
Someone who doesn't have medical training. How do you think your professional background impacts or influences how you may look at video evidence or medical evidence?
You know, I recognize the amount of time that a person can be without air before they're unconscious.
So if there's conflict with respect to why that person may be lacking air, do you think that you would draw, and you hear two conflicting opinions about that, right? Do you think you would be, do you think your personal training may bias or impact how you listen to medical evidence? Right? If one witness comes in and says the human body can withstand not having oxygen for a half an hour, right? And another one comes in and says, no, human body needs air every 3 seconds, right? Or, you know, some kind of something you know to be wrong based on your training.
Right.
You would obviously draw upon your own personal knowledge in that instance, right?
Yes.
But let's assume that it's a closer question between two people, right? Between two medical experts. Do you think you would, your personal training would impact how you, or the credibility you assess to those people, those two witnesses?
Yes.
Okay. Now, one of the things you're told is you have to set aside, I mean, we all have our personal experiences, right?
Yes.
And you are required to judge this case based exclusively on the evidence that's presented in court. So how do you set aside your personal training, your personal knowledge, and judge the case on the facts as presented in court in that instance?
I'd have to weigh what the expert would say,
okay,
and then how the judge directs to follow
Okay.
the law.
Sure. You were asked a series of questions about your general impression of both Mr. Chauvin as well as Mr. Floyd, and you, with respect to both, you had a neutral opinion as to both.
Yes.
Do you recall that? In terms of Mr. Chauvin, you wrote, I am not sure what training the defendants had for this kind of event. I don't know who was in charge, how the whole encounter started, or what frame of mind they were in. Right?
Right.
Can you just kind of, I mean, what in your opinion, you know, sitting here now, how do those things impact your impression of Mr. Chauvin?
Well, I suppose based on the training that's given, that would tell me if he was utilizing the training given.
Okay.
You know, his knowledge of the training given.
Fair enough.
So.
And in terms of Mr. Floyd, you wrote, did George Floyd resist? Did he cooperate initially? Was George Floyd armed? Right?
Right.
So what I'm gathering is that you think that there's potentially more to this story than what you may have seen on the news. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, I don't know the whole story.
Okay.
Yes.
And again, the story has to be based, or the verdict, I should say, has to be based on the evidence that's presented in court. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And ultimately, you are asked whether, no matter what you have heard, no matter what opinions you might have formed, can you put all of that aside and decide this case only on the evidence you receive in court, follow the law, and decide the case in a fair and impartial manner? And your answer was?
Yes.
You indicated that you had talked with your friends or family members about the case, or potentially posted on social media. Let me ask you, did you ever post anything about this case on social media?
I have not.
But so you've had conversations with friends and coworkers and things of that nature.
Family, yeah.
And the question, or what opinions you may have expressed, you said, how could police kneel on someone until dead? Was kneeling on him appropriate? So are you asking these questions in the abstract, or do you have an opinion that this was too long to kneel on someone?
I suppose probably asking abstractly, but
Well, let me ask you more concretely then. Have you formed an opinion as to the actions of Mr. Chauvin?
I have not.
So whether you're asking the question of how could it be this long, right?
Okay.
Is that indicative of an opinion that you think it was too long?
Sounds like it, yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I have to take you at face value. I don't want to put words in your mouth, right? I'm trying to see what's
I
in your-
suppose knowing that Mr. Floyd died, I would say yes, it was too long.
So have you formed an opinion as to Mr. Floyd's cause of death?
I don't know. No, I don't think I have.
Do you have an opinion as to have you formed an opinion as to who is responsible for Mr. Floyd's death?
I have not.
I just want to remind you of one thing that was listed in the questionnaire is that if there's anything that you want to speak about privately, we have the ability to shut off and do that in-camera review.
Okay.
And there are a few things that you wrote in here that I think are personal. I don't know. Some people are comfortable talking about contacts with police and family members and things publicly, and others aren't. So I have a question. There's some questions about some of your past experiences. Would you prefer that we do that privately, or are you comfortable answering them on the record over the air? It's up to you.
Privately.
Privately.
Yeah, I agree, Your Honor.
All right, we will, finding that these are deeply personal matters, under the rule, I'm going to order that the audio be turned off for broadcast purposes. topic, so we are back on audio. Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, in the questionnaire, you were asked a series of questions about, there were a series of these kind of broad blanket statements, and you were asked to agree or disagree, essentially, or rank your opinion on these statements. I'd like to follow up. I know that they're very broad and there may be nuance to answers, but I wanted to follow up on a couple of these. There is a question that says, discrimination is not as bad as the media makes it out to be. That's a weird statement, so I'll read it again. Discrimination is not as bad as the media makes it out to be. And you somewhat disagreed with that. Why would you somewhat disagree?
I don't know that the media makes it as bad as it seems to me.
So that was
I disagree with the whole, the statement that the media makes it worse. I don't agree with that.
Right, because the next statement is blacks and other minorities do not receive equal treatment as whites in the criminal justice system, and you strongly agreed with that.
Yes, I do.
So, in terms of your opinion, right? I mean, you understand that, or it's your belief that discrimination exists.
Yes.
And that it's bad.
Yes.
And that as a result of that discrimination, black and other minorities do not receive equal treatment. You would agree with that?
Yes.
All right. So the question becomes based on that opinion, right? Is that going to affect your judgment of this case? If this case is not about race at all, for example, right? And it's a question of police practice and cause of death, are you going to, is your judgment going to be impacted by your opinions as to discrimination in this?
No.
So if a police officer has an interaction with a minority, does that automatically make it discrimination, I guess?
No.
All right. You also, I think, have a fairly healthy respect for law enforcement. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
The question is presented, or the statement is presented, police in my community make me feel safe, and you strongly agree with that.
Yes.
Right? There's a statement, a similar statement that says, I do not trust the police, and you somewhat disagree with that.
I don't distrust the police.
Okay.
Is that what?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the police make you feel safe, and you strongly agree with that.
Right.
But when it says, I don't trust the police, you don't strongly disagree. You somewhat disagree. So I'm asking, I guess, what is it that gives you some reservation to say, I don't trust the police?
They're human.
Okay, fair enough. Which, my last question on these statements, there's a statement that says, because law enforcement officers have such dangerous jobs, it is not right to second-guess decisions they make while on duty, and you somewhat disagree with that. So would you agree the converse is true, that there are circumstances wherein police decision-making needs to be examined?
Yes.
If a person testifies and they're a police officer, do you give their testimony more weight simply by virtue of the fact that they're a police officer?
No.
I think you said they're all human, right? Or we're
yes,
all human.
Exactly.
You indicated, or you were asked a series of questions about both Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter. Your opinion about the statement Black Lives Matter is somewhat favorable, and your opinion as to the Blue Lives Matter is somewhat unfavorable. So I'll read to you what you wrote. With respect to Black Lives Matter, you wrote, I believe that black lives do matter, and that this group is trying to highlight the injustices done to black people, especially for just being black. You stand by that proposition?
Yes.
Again, I mean, knowing that this case if I were to say this case is not about race, right?
Right.
Can you set aside your perception of the Black Lives Matter or the Blue Lives Matter and judge the case based on the
its
evidence?
merit? Yes.
Great. Finally, ma'am, you were asked, do you want to serve as a juror in this case? You checked the box, not sure, and you wrote, this is an important case. The decision made by the jury will have a national consequence that is a heavy weight to carry no matter the outcome. So let me ask you, can you envision a situation, or can you envision the very real possibility that your verdict may be not guilty?
Yes.
Can you likewise envision a scenario where your verdict would be guilty?
Yes.
Can you apply the presumption of innocence?
Yes.
Will you?
Yes, I will.
So, to put it in another way, this is pay is terrible, right? To be a juror, it's a hard job. It requires a lot of attention. Why should you be a juror in this case?
I think I can be impartial and listen to instructions and go with what I'm given and ignore the outside stuff.
Fair enough. If I may have a moment, Your Honor. I'm sorry, I just have a few more questions for you. Again, without identifying the location of where you work, do you work in an emergency room, or have you ever worked in an emergency room?
No.
Okay. So have you ever been in a situation as a registered nurse where you are engaged in resuscitative efforts?
Yes.
Okay. And again, do you think that those experiences may impact how you view what was done in this particular case?
And that we all use our life experiences to make judgments.
So let's there was that question about questioning police decision making, right?
Yes.
In that those events where you're attempting to resuscitate someone, it's a hectic scene, right?
It is, yes.
And a lot of split-second decisions are made,
yes.
Right? Would you be second-guessing resuscitative efforts if you're watching them, happen? Do you think it's fair to second-guess resuscitative efforts? or doctor's decisions?
Not as it's happening.
After the fact?
We debrief after Code Blues.
Okay.
So then we look at what went wrong, what went right.
Okay. Fair enough. If I may have just another moment. Sorry, Your Honor. It's just one of those issues. All right. Imagine you're in the deliberation room, right? And the subject of the medical stuff comes up. Of medical issues come up. Do you go to the jurors and say, I'm a nurse, I know better, this is what we need to do, if you think that the jurors are wrong?
I guess it would depend on my instructions of what we can consider.
Nelson, would you mind if I jump in?
No, please.
I think what we're trying to get at is, let's go back to the concept of a fair trial, which is kind of a hard to define term.
Right.
But one of the elements of a fair trial is that we're all working off the same script. In other words, the lawyers know what it is you're considering, both for the state and for the defense. And so you can't be the expert witness in the jury room because no one knows what you're saying as far as that goes. When you're providing essentially what would be described as evidence as opposed to evaluation of evidence that is there, you might understand the terminology that they use more readily than another juror. But can you avoid being the expert witness in the jury room?
I'm not a witness, so
okay.
As you're explaining it, yes.
So does that make some sense?
Yes.
And you can see why
yes.
both sides might have a concern.
Right.
They want to know what the evidence is that you're considering, and you cannot add to the evidence with your own expert opinion.
I understand, yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right.
Can you do that?
Can I do that? Yes.
Okay. One more moment.
Mr. Slisher. Give me a quick moment. You can go to the lectern. I just have to talk to Mr. Schaefer.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon now.
Good afternoon.
You've been in the nursing field for a long time, and without identifying any particular facilities you've worked at, I'd like to hear a little bit more about the different types of nursing positions you've held through the years. Perhaps starting with the most recent one that you hold now. What is your job like?
Busy, very busy. I work with ventilated patients, and with COVID, there's a lot of people coming to us on ventilators. Nursing care's busy.
As you look around the courtroom and you see the measures that they've taken to safeguard us during this COVID period, are you satisfied with these measures?
Yes.
Do you think they're too far or more than necessary?
Well, I think they're about right.
Okay. What about the job you had before you were focusing on the patient ventilation?
It was with cardiac care.
Okay.
So an intensive care kind of setting. So I don't know what you want to know about it. But.
Well, what do you do as a cardiac care nurse?
Take care of patients, keep them alive. There's different treatments. I don't know if they've had a heart attack. Sometimes there's a hypothermia treatment. There's a balloon pump treatment. There's different ways of going. We get them better so they can get out of the ICU.
As an RN, you dispense medication.
Yes.
Including controlled substances.
Yes.
And can you describe some of the measures that are in place to make sure that controlled substances go to the patient and not anywhere else?
Yes. We dispense from a machine and have a password, and so there's an internal record of any med you take out. There's witnesses to waste if you don't give a full dose of a controlled substance.
Do you believe that the focus that your hospital has placed on issues regarding opiates has increased over the years?
That we're using opiates more? Is that
the potential diversion of opiates, I guess, is what.
Oh, well, it's been brought to our attention recently. I think someone was dismissed for that. So yeah, they're starting to focus on that.
Have you come across a number of opiate addicted patients in your practice?
Yes.
Do you think that opiate addiction is more prevalent than it was, say, when you started nursing back in, was it 2003 approximately?
1994 is when I started nursing.
Okay, you must have been a nurse before you were an RN then.
Yes.
Okay.
So
did you start as an LPN? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, probably more. I see more opiate addicted patients now.
Do you attribute opiate addiction to any particular group or type of person, or have you found in your practice it can be
It can be anybody, yes.
You obviously know how to perform CPR.
Yes.
Have you ever been in a situation where you're not at your job, where you've had to render aid to somebody, be it CPR or some other type of emergency aid beyond applying a Band-Aid?
I have not.
What would you do in a circumstance in which you came upon an incident and you thought that somebody needed your help, would you jump in to help?
Yes, I would.
Why is that?
That's what I do. And part of being human, I have that compassion. If it were me, I'd want somebody to step up and try and help.
Do you feel that you have any other special obligation given your training?
As a nurse, I feel obligated to help someone who needs medical assistance, yes.
On the questionnaire, when you were discussing general impressions of the defendants, you remarked that you weren't sure what kind of training the defendants had for this type of event. Can you tell me what would you be interested in learning about what kind of training a defendant may have, a police officer may have?
Probably de-escalation and restraining.
You also indicated that you would want to know whether or not George Floyd was armed.
I think that would affect the officer's decision on how to act, yes.
You indicated that you somewhat disagree with the notion of defunding the Minneapolis Police Department. Can you tell me why that is?
Well, I don't want their finances taken away. I believe the police have a job to do, and for the most part, it gets done. So they need money for that. And to take money away would probably make less police available.
And that would not improve the situation.
Right.
Okay. All right. I appreciate your answers to my questions today. If you may give me a moment, Your Honor. Thank you. The state passes for cause.
All right, juror number 89, you will serve on this jury. And so, we're gonna, we'll let that sink in. We're gonna have you come back on March 29th at 9 a.m. That's when we're gonna start the trial. But make sure you answer any phone calls or communications from the court, because as you've already seen, sometimes we end up with some delays, and that's possible. We're pretty confident in that start time, so if nothing else, we will call simply to remind you that we're set to go on that date and time. Okay. In the meantime, we started by telling people to avoid any media coverage about this case. The more you can avoid the news generally, because it's so prevalent. If you could do that, that'd be appreciated.
Okay.
You can go, the deputy's going to take some paperwork from you, but also give you some further instructions, and then we'll see you on March 29th.
Thank you.
All right, it's almost 12:15. We're going to take our noon break. Let's try and reconvene at 1:15. We might not start till 1:30, but let's give it a shot. We still have one juror from the morning who Mr. Schaefer has advised that he's on his lunch break, and we've given them lunch. So let's come back 1:15, hopefully with that juror, and then we'll move to the afternoon group. All right, thank you.
community that exists, and even if the police were to roll over this place, the people will come right back, and the barricades will come right back up, and they're not going to be able to quash this space.
No justice. No streets. No justice. No streets. No justice. No streets.
Let me tell you that the city killed a man. Yes. And that is why we are here. That is why the community is standing for justice and asking and demanding for justice.
This street does not belong to you anymore, City of Minneapolis. You're going to have to negotiate. You're going to have to give us some justice if you want that street back.
After George Floyd was murdered, the barricades went up and the demand went out. And those demands, the justice resolution, has played a very, very key role in establishing this as a space of protest and establishing this as an autonomous zone. That's been the reason the barricades stay up.
It's for holding the police accountable, it's for demanding justice, and it's also demanding structural changes and investments into the community.
It isn't any one individual demand, it is a collection of needs and wants from this community saying, these are the things that we need in order to move forward to heal. And it's just talking about the beginning steps. And so we're talking about merely $155 million over the course of 10 years, which is really not a huge amount of money when we're talking about the oppression and the systematic racism that has kept this community down from the beginning.
But we understand that this is not the beginning, neither is this the end to justice. Play your role. We're not asking you, we're demanding, play your role. Bring the resources. We have the healers, we have the teachers. Quit pimping us. Quit prostituting us. Expecting us to run into a burning building with a water gun. Give us the resources so that we can now heal our own land with our own bodies. People who look like us, sound like us, move like us, and think like us.
What can change, or what can be different, or what can be better, or what can happen where we're okay to opening up the streets if we say no justice, no street. And yeah, the 20 to 4 demands is here, but that's just a scratch on the surface, because that doesn't really say black liberation.
GFS has utilized a partial demand very, very well to prop up the space, and it's a partial demand in the sense that it's not necessarily demanding the complete collapse of the world capitalist system. We say that we hold the space until the demands are met, and the city certainly does not want to meet the demands, and so they won't take back the space. So we're in a sort of crossfire.
They're gonna have to meet those demands before we give up 38th Street. We're not giving it up. 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 No justice. No streets.
One of the big things about how things are defeated beforehand, it's when you don't develop processes and systems that can continue to keep themselves up. At GFS, every day there's a meeting in the morning and a meeting in the night. And that has been one of the ways that like community has really, really developed. And like you look around here, you see like bus stops turned into storage, bus stops turned into a people's closet. You see bookshelves going up. You see we've got a medical shed. We've got a greenhouse.
We've got a library. 612 MASH is a medic organization that operates out of the square. And there's this People's Way. This is a public space, you know, it's a public meeting space, and it's a public space of a real like community and joy and unity. And it's a sacred space, you know, and it's a space of grieving and also of liberation. And so for people who are coming in here, you know, people come from all over. It's almost a pilgrimage site in that way. I think it's something really to be said about how the common spaces and collectively maintained spaces have been like eroded by capitalism. You can see this as a return of the commons in a lot of ways.
In the ruins of capitalism, we've built something new, and something that sort of leaders in the square, Marsha especially, has said before. This is a blueprint for how society can be. You know, how society can be organized, how we can develop community and come here together and meet the needs of the community. Because every day there are people who are unhoused who will come here sort of to find sanctuary. They'll come here and they'll get fed, they'll get clothed, and they'll get